You're listening to the Joel Martin Mastery Podcast, home of the 2-hour deep dive interview with gold, platinum, and multi-platinum bands, including Stained, Blue Rodeo, The Arkells, Finger 11, Big Wreck, Moist, Bedouin Soundclash, I Mother Earth, Ill Scarlet, Neverending White Lights, Thornley, and many more. Please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast, as well as share, comment, and like. Now let's dive in to today's episode. Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of the podcast. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. We are joined by a very special guest. He's achieved a level of mastery as the guitarist for the band Clarknova, and he's become one of the most sought-after front of house technicians, as well as tour managers for iconic artists like 3 Days Grace, like Big Wreck, like Saint Asonia, JJ Wild. How many more can I name here? I Mother Earth, Finger 11, just to name a few. So welcome to the podcast, Dan, Preston. Dan, how are you? And how much did it mean to you to work with one of your guitar heroes not too long ago in Zakk Wylde?
Hey, first of all, thanks for having me back on. This will be a fun one, going through some records that I grew up on. Last year's been very busy. Feel like we're really getting back to it now. COVID is finally in the distant past. So one of the gigs last year was a one-off. I just called in basically on the day. It's a Black Label Society and tracks. We're at History in Toronto last August, so I got to call in to do monitors for them. So super cool for me because Zakk's one of my guys, that's for sure. As being a guitar player, he's right up there. If he's probably the number two, I would almost say number one, but I got to give that spot to Randy Rhoads. But Zakk's my one of my guys, and it was cool meeting them all. I had met Dario online before doing some guitar lessons and stuff, so he spotted me out and it's like doing here kind of thing, right? So meeting Zakk and having a little bit of a chat with him was super cool, and hopefully that comes back down the line. Love to work with those guys again. It was a great day.
And does your love for Zakk start with Black Label Society? Is it his work with Ozzy?
Oh, it's Ozzy right out of the gate too, because as we'll get into this more when we start talking about the records and stuff like that. Basically just after I started playing guitar, Zakk Wylde got the Ozzy gig. So it was like kind of just like a shoe-in new guitar hero for me. And, it wasn't just because he was with Ozzy. It's like I heard that first record, No Rest for the Wicked, and just loved the chops. I loved his style right out of the gate. And I think about it now, he was like a kid, like he was 19, 20 years old back then, right? And just to think of getting thrown into that and what he did on that record is just like, awesome playing. Yeah.
So what was your reaction when Pantera announces that they're coming out of retirement, they're going back on tour, and you're thinking, who could possibly fill in for Dimebag Darrell? And it's announced that it's Zakk Wylde. So for you, I know, so you're a big Ozzy fan, you're a big Zakk Wylde fan, you're a big Pantera fan. So it seems like all three of those mesh together. What are your thoughts?
Well, you know what, that was kind of, I saw it coming a mile away. I think anybody that kind of just was a fan of all those bands you just listed knew right away, like that it was going to be Zakk Wylde when they kind of announced they were going to do a reunion, right? There's nobody else to do that, right? And it's not even just the chops and all that. It's that friendship that Zakk and Dimebag had, right? Like they were brothers, right? And just think about who would, Dimebag want to fill that spot. If he had a word and, had to say in it, it would be Zakk hands down. Right. So it's such a cool thing to see, cause he's pulling it off great. So it was Charlie Benante from Anthrax pulling off Vinny's spot. It's like, they're crushing it, it still sounds like Zakk. Right. And a lot of people are kind of slagging them because it's like, hey, it doesn't sound like Dimebag. It's like, it's not going to, and we don't want it to. No one can do that. So just to hear Zakk's little sound within those tunes, I think it's great. And it's an awesome tribute, and I'm sure they're having a blast, and they're playing an amazing honor to those.
It's almost like Zach is stepping in to honor his friend. You know, it's not just that he's one of the few people that can pull off those guitar solos and guitar riffs, but it's also like he's like one of the boys that steps in honor of his friend.
Absolutely. Just like I said, it's not necessarily the chops and about Dimebag's playing and trying to match that. It's about that friendship, and it's about that, honoring his friend more so than just a guy that can play the parts, right? Which he is the best to do that too. So it's a double whammy. There's nobody else better to do that, and so I'm glad to see it. I got tickets for it. I actually was supposed to do some gigs myself doing sound, and I actually took the day off and made sure I wasn't working on that day.
That's a holy day.
It is a holy day. I was supposed to fly out west with the Finger 11 guys, and it's like, and I love them to death, but I just took a local gig the day before and staying home because I have to see that show. Absolutely 100% have to. So August 12th is going to be a good day.
Yeah. So August 12th. Okay. So you're seeing them where they're headlining. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's them and the Lamb of God. So that's good. That's cool. It's going to be.
What's funny is your concert is a sandwich of my concert. So I see them opening for Metallica August 11th and 13th, and you're on the 12th. So you're the day after I see them open for Metallica.
Yeah, exactly. I have a few friends that are going to like Montreal to go see the Metallica show, which is going to be awesome too, right? To see, because those shows are going to be ginormous, right? And so it's going to be cool to see, Pantera and then Metallica come out and do their thing, right? So yeah, very cool.
And especially on your show, you have Lamb of God opening, which they're a headliner in their own right, so it's almost a double bill.
It really almost is. Love Lamb of God, right? They're just for the new age metal stuff. They're one of the guys at the top of the list, that's for sure. Killer band.
I saw Lamb of God, I think it was last year in Montreal, and it was like Lamb of God, Trivium, Megadeth. It was like a huge quadruple bill, and the mosh pit was so insane. And like Montreal's known for having like the best crowds. Like I don't know why that is, but like Quebec goes crazy for metal bands. But the crowd was so insane, and especially for Lamb of God, that I had higher up seats, so I could see down into like an above view of the mosh pit. The mosh pit was so insane that I took a video of it, and it went viral. Like it was such an insane mosh pit that everyone was sharing it, to the point that the Trivium went on before them, and the Trivium mosh pit video I took, Trivium themselves reached out to me and said, dude, that video is insane. Can you send it to us so we can post it ourselves? So that's how crazy it gets when you have Lamb of God playing.
Very, very cool, man. That's cool that went viral for you. Yeah, it's just especially three bands like that, right? Long live metal. That's all I got to say. And long live mosh pits. I don't get them in them anymore, but long live mosh pits. I love them.
Yes, sir. So we see behind you. So you're in a studio here. I remember from last time. Lots of guitars going on. Are there any new guitars since August of last year when you were on? I see you in guitar shop sometimes. I see videos of you playing. Can you think any new guitars? I know it's an addiction for us.
Yeah, I got there's one new since last year out of I think I got 16. I'm gonna grab it. I'll show you. Why not, right? So yeah. A big fan of these. Sire has put in a line with Larry Carlton, famous session guitar player, master player, jazz rock guy. And so he's worked with Sire, and he's put in his own line of guitars. So this one is a TFM 7. I have a trans black version of it too, but I do some work through Music Pro when I'm not touring. And then this came in like on a trade, and I had to grab it. It is a beautiful guitar, like the natural finish, roasted maple neck. They're just wonderful guitars for an amazing price. Like, I'm not trying to be a sales or anything, but I like having guitars that are versatile, and this is as versatile as it comes. And for the price, like if this is a Fender or something, it would be another $1,000 or $1,500 more than what this is. The spec is really nice, plays and sounds amazing. So there's the new one.
There we go. I feel like every year, like if we have you on every year, there's got to be at least one or two new guitars to show off.
Or one, I'll get rid of something that's not, my fancy anymore and get something else, right? So it's a never ending thing. It's same with gear and amps and all that stuff, even though I'm not like a, pro player on the circuit, and definitely not at this point. But I just love gear and I love keeping updated and I love playing still. That'll never change.
So we had you on the podcast just under a year ago. So August of 2022, you were on episode 70. So if we have Dan Preston fans that are tuning in here for the first time, you want to go back to episode 70 because we did a full 2-hour deep dive of your life, your career, your discography, your guitar work, all that stuff, all the live sound stuff. And today we're going to do something different. So we have a series here, my 5 favorite albums. So we're going to spend a few more minutes catching up on what you've been up to over the last year since the last interview, and then we're gonna deep dive into your 5 favorite albums, and it's a great list, man. There's some all-time great albums on there. I want to start with a fan question, if that's okay. So we have a question sent in from Sam Maldonia. His question is, what's the most underrated venue to see a live show in Canada? Any come to mind?
Underrated? Jeez, they all melt together. This is going to be one to really think about.
I'll give you a second to think about it. I guess underrated could be like, is there any venue that when you show up there, for some reason, the acoustics or something always sounds fantastic, or maybe with the layout, I don't know, one with maybe like a balcony where it just feels so intimate, like the band surrounded, it could be a few different things that makes a great venue.
Yeah, for sure. One comes to mind, and I'll mention just because it's new, and I don't know if the word underrated could be tied to it because there's a lot of people that are really digging it, but History in Toronto. I did my first gig there with Big Wreck, and it's just, as soon as the guys come up for sound check, it was just like, bam, there it is, big D&B rig. I had my own front end of like my own console and waves and outboard gear that I tour with them, and everything came together really nice. And I've been back there a couple of times to see some shows. Like I was there with Black Label Society, right? So I was able to get out front after Black Label Society and watch Anthrax, and just, and the acoustics are amazing. The layout is awesome. There's not a bad seat in the house aesthetically, like the bars themselves and everything, and the seating. It's all a wonderful venue. The only thing that sucks is the load in. So that's not going to pertain to a lot of listeners, because a lot of listeners people are going to go see the shows. But for guys like me that are the tech guys and loaders and all that, it's a little tough, to get in there. But
like it's just tight to get the vehicles in, or there's
the loading dock, and then it goes. You can go right up to the floor, but then there's a back hallway. So if you have anything like set carts, like any of these bigger bands like Anthrax and Black Label Society, where there's big, huge amps and all set carts, like we basically had to leave on that Black Label Society Anthrax show. We had to leave all of Anthrax set carts on the loading dock, right? After Black Label was done, we took all of the Wild Audio stacks out, all their drums out, right on the loading dock, did the old tic-tac-toe kind of thing, Tetris thing, brought in all of Anthrax's set carts, clicked everything back in, all the audio connections, and it was done and ready and set up in 20 minutes on a changeover. So, it was tough. There's a lot of people involved in doing that, but that just goes to show that maybe gives your listeners a little bit of insight to what can happen. They just, a curtain goes up, they don't see anything, and 20 minutes later, there's a band out there, but it is a crazy fiasco in the back to make that happen, right? So, but yeah, History's a great venue. It's one of my more favorite venues to do sound in acoustically, and it's just a good vibe. Not a bad seat in the house.
It's funny how some jobs or some careers, it's only when something screws up that you notice someone, like if everything just sounds great and looks great, you're into it. But it's like if someone can't hear the vocals, or like a guitar stops working, or the lighting is off, or it's just strange. It's like a lot, you only get noticed kind of sometimes when there's a mistake. People take it for granted why it looks and sounds so good.
Exactly. That's the thing. It's just like, what's the old term? It's like it takes 10 instances of positive reinforcement to basically counteract any negative, thing that you get thrown at you. So there's that right there. Everybody's going to, harp on the negative, right? You can do a million positive things. It's like, oh yeah. And then one negative thing, that's what gets pointed at, right? That's just the way humans work. And that's noted. And it's just the way it rolls, right?
Well, the good thing is that the people that actually care and the people that do notice are the ones that are hiring you. So it's the bands that are telling you, man, we sounded so good tonight, or everything sounded perfect. It's those that actually matter, really, that are paying attention. Like I was there at some of the shows that you've done, and it sounds incredible, and I'll tell you, like, man, that sounded so good. And I know that some of the members in the bands you work with say, whenever we have a chance, we want Dan there because he brings out the best in us and we sound our best. So I guess that's where you hopefully you get a few of those for every few gigs. You get somebody that actually does notice and says something.
Absolutely. At this point now, it's all mostly positive, right? It's like, it ain't perfect. I have my nights where things are a little off, or, gear malfunction or something like that, right? And it happens, right? But for the most part, it's all positive feedback. And all the bands that I'm working with right now are all super happy. And that's my job, is just keep them happy. And because they get feedback from their friends and family that come out, especially when we're touring locally, right? So, and that's been all really positive this year. And so I'm happy, thankful. I'll still keep doing my job to the utmost level, despite what I hear, good, bad, indifferent. I just do what I do, right?
So we just talked about history being maybe one of the most underrated venues in Canada. A venue that is not underrated is Massey Hall. Massey Hall is considered one of the best sounding venues in the world. I believe you were able to work with the Mars Volta at Massey Hall. Maybe you've done other events at Massey Hall as well. What makes Massey Hall so legendary?
Well, Massey is just the people have been through there, and just how long it's been around, right? It's just there's as they say, if the walls could speak, right? It's just it's pretty intense. And just it's the beauty of the building. Like the renovation was awesome, and made it even nicer and more accessible. Stage in the backstage area are way better than it used to be. But there's just definitely a vibe when you walk in the building, because that architecture, like all up in the ceiling and stuff, they've kept that intact. It's not like they just ripped it to shreds and made something new out of the shell. There's a lot of of what it used to be still in there. I was actually expecting it to be a lot different when I walked in. It's like, no, this still feels like Massey Hall, just updated and cleaner. And but all the pillars and the wood carvings and everything all up in the ceiling, and that in the general layout is all they kept that all intact, right? So it's lots of history there.
Yeah, it's known as one of the best sounding venues in the world. Essentially, I've seen Ryan Adams there. I've seen Death Cab for Cutie there. I've probably seen a few more that I'm forgetting. And man, I remember one of the artists I've seen was just playing an acoustic guitar and singing, and I was at the back. Like, every seat is good. It's not a massive venue, but I was way at the back, and it sounded like the artist was sitting in front of me, unplugged, playing an acoustic and singing like at a campfire. It just sounded so close to me, despite me being far away. What do you think? What is it that makes the acoustics so great in there?
Well, it's just that's the thing. There's the acoustic treatments that they have in there. It's the angles. There's not a lot of just plain flat surfaces in there. Everything, even you think of all those wood carvings and all that stuff, that is going to affect the sound. That's going to be some kind of absorption and deflection, right? So you're not just getting a slap back where you do it like something like it's more of a warehouse or an arena, right? Where it's just you're just slap back off the ceiling and that. So I'd say it's like sonically, just when you walk into the building, it is a softer sounding building, and it's the seats as well. Those are all acoustic treatment. Plus, they've got that PA tuned professionally and very, very well in there. Right. We got there's subs that are flown up top of the PA hang. So it's not like in the old days where the subs would just be on the floor and then you have your line array PA or point source like hung and rigged into the ceiling. Like they got the subs up top. So you're getting that nice big cushiony bass response up in the very, very top too. So it's more of an even sounding room from top to bottom, right? So you get a sound engineer with good gear that knows exactly what he's doing, and good sources, great sounding acoustic guitar and a great vocal through great microphones, and that's why you heard what you heard.
Yeah, I saw that you did quite a few shows with Finger 11, which I know you have a history with, and I see that they have some massive festivals. Some of them are in the U.S. that you'll be a part of. One, I guess a group of shows you did. They had a back-to-back Toronto show and Ottawa show where they were recording and filming, preparing for an upcoming greatest hits album. I was there for the Ottawa show, looked amazing, sounded amazing. The band was on point. My question is, how different is it preparing for a live show, knowing that it's actually going to be recorded? So it's not just that in the moment it looks great and people have a good time, they go home and the audio just dissipates into the ether and into history. Here, it's actually going to be recorded and it's got to sound perfect afterwards for recall, essentially. How different is that to prepare for?
Yeah, it's a little different. It's not so much for me per se, because what we did on that, we recorded both. In Ottawa, the show that you were at, we actually brought in a separate sound engineer that basically took a multi-track feed into another console, and recorded it just on his computer system, right? So the Toronto laptops so puts a little more stress on it because you really got to watch your gain and that and make sure nothing's distorting, and that's basically regardless if we're recording or not. But there's that a little extra kind of thing on it where it's like, okay, make absolutely sure that these sources are super clean, right? So you're just spending a little tiny bit more time on making sure that mic is in the perfect spot, getting the headphones on and making sure that everything's EQ'd nicely and the gain structure is really good. And so nothing's distorting. So that's the thing. You get any kind of distortion, whether it be analog or digital distortion, you can't take that away. There's things you can mask it, in post-production, but yeah, so those sources. So it puts a little extra, I wouldn't say it's a stress, but just you got to put in that a little extra effort to make sure that things are going to be all nice and tickety-boo clean, right? As far as visually, that's a different thing too. I think that's more pressure on the lighting guys and the video guys because they got to get those shots right. Since we're recording audio twice, there's little things that you can do, right? And and you can do, not say fix things in the mix, but just re-EQ, compress, and that. But the movement of the guys, that's where the stress actually lies. I should just hit that. Like it's probably more stress on the band than any of the crew, 100%, because they know it's just like their playing's got to be on point. They got to look good. They got to their movement, lighting cues and stuff. They got to be in the light when they're doing a guitar solo, right? Where sometimes they just get lost in the moment and don't care and just give her, right? But so for recording, you definitely gotta, it's stressy for the band and they got to be on point for everything. So
that greatest hits album did come out. What's cool is it's like there's a year history between the last interview and this. So it's like we can see you at that show. And then months later, last month, that greatest hits album did come out. And there was a cover of Pink Floyd's Welcome to the Machine, which is off of one of my 3 favorite albums of all time, Pink Floyd, Wish You Were Here. And they released a new single called Together Right. They filmed an awesome music video for it, and you were actually on location for that. Can you give us any insight into what it was like with that music video?
Yeah, I'll tell you right out of the gate. It was cold, dark, long. It was a day. So yeah, I just went down to basically accept their backline gear. It's not like there was no sound, there's no stage or anything. It was just setting up their backline, and at a different part in the warehouse where they shot it. But yeah, it was a cold, dark, rainy day. You know, it was no heat in this building. It was an old machine factory, I guess, old Stelco plant, I guess, out in Hamilton, right? So I will tell you though, I was the one being the whiner that day, because I think mostly because once everything was kind of in the building and I just had to wait to set up the gear, and the guys were kept busy, right? So, you know, they kept super chipper and they were just cracking jokes all day, and, you know, it's doing, you know, doing finger 11 things as they do, right? Because they're all just still best buddies. Like they're all still
Old
teenagers.
high school friends. Yeah.
Are, right? That's why I love them, man. It's just, they just have remained the same guys and remain really, really good friends. And they kept really in good spirits that day, like more so than I thought that they would, because I was being the one. I'm like, man, like, you know, just wishing those shots could get done so I can get the truck packed and get home. So, but it was awesome. It was a really cool setting, like really dark and like kind of apocalyptic, you know, kind of setting, you know, and they took a big photo shoot that day, and I've seen them starting to commit online. With them releasing, new show dates and stuff, and the pictures look great and they look awesome, right? So yeah, it was a really cool day. Other than the weather and the surroundings, I guess. You know,
Your description of cold, cold, damp, dark, rainy. That seems perfect for a Finger 11 music video.
it was perfect. That's the thing. Is at the end of the day, it's hearing it back and listen. Sorry, watching it back. It's like, yeah, it was absolutely perfect. Yeah. Great track too. Love the new tune. And it's so much fun to mix live. It's got a really good energy to it.
So you're always off and on with Monster Truck. I know it seems like you're friends with the band, and like whenever you're available, it's like you come in for one gig here, one gig there. Monster Truck, and then you've been really busy with JJ Wild. I even, you know, recently I'm seeing you flying over to like Vancouver. And what can you say about Monster Truck and JJ Wild? Any insights you can give us or stories about your time with those two?
Yeah, well, Monster Truck guys, yeah, it's just some one-offs here and there, right? Like they got a main guy that they go out with, right? I think there's a couple that do most of their touring, but Brandon will give me a call and stuff and run a bunch of dates by me, so I was able to do one this year that's coming up on July 28th at Casino Rama, playing with the Headstones, right? So I was happy to do that because I love hooking up with those guys. They're probably the easiest going, just fun, you know, most fun guys in Canada, and they just pedal the metal rock and roll. It's just, you can't get more simple rock and roll fun than Monster Truck. You just can't. And they're great guys, and I'll work with them anytime.
And then with JJ Wild, it looks like she's having a ton of success. Like it looks like momentum is building, and the shows are getting bigger. It looked like, I think it was the Burlington Sound of Music Festival. It looked like you were there multiple days with Finger 11 with her, and her crowd looked huge. You mentioned you're coming up here to Ottawa, I guess this Saturday. She's playing at Hope Beach Volleyball. So from the outside, it looks like there's all this momentum, and she's getting great reviews for how great her live show is. Any thoughts on JJ Wild?
Yeah, well, that's why I'm still there, because it's like her and the band are crushing it, you know, and they keep getting better and better, and that's what I love seeing. And I like at this point in my career, I think we talked about this before on the first podcast, but this is the first chance I've had with all the bands that I've worked with to have people in the band be younger. I've always been with bands that were older or the same age as me, right? So it's kind of cool. I bring a little bit of a lineage within my career and what I do to them, right? And get to, you know, somewhat mentor them, even though I'm not, you know, I don't preach anything to them. I don't shove anything down their throat, because they got to go through the motions of learning how this train rolls, right? But I absolutely love that spot, and they're all wonderful, you know, like they're great hang. There's a lot of respect there, you know, and on the business side of it too, as you were just saying, there is a lot of momentum building with that. And, you know, she's got a good team behind her. The live show does keep getting better and better. She's writing constantly. So there's just a big giant push there. Everybody that's involved in that band, JJ herself, management, very super involved, and there's a lot of forward momentum, right? And that's always good to see. It's something that, I like to be a part of. It's just moving forward with anything, that I'm doing. So.
And so you mentioned that most of the bands you work with, it's like, they're older. You're the young pup that's there, making sure they sound great. In this case, you were saying that maybe you're older and you have wisdom, but it's also, I guess she's also the first time where when you're coming in, it's not with a band that's already established. You've been there with the trajectory going up as well, which is different.
Exactly. And that's what, find it that's exciting and fun, right? To see this all build. Right. So, and as much as I bring to them, that's bringing me something too. It's kind of, sparking a little bit of much needed, not that I'm an old guy yet, but much needed youth back in, right? Too. It's exciting, right? Because they're all just, mid 20 up to 30, and super excited, and, the future awaits them, so that's fun to be a part of and watch and help, develop.
And I would say the band that's probably kept you the most busy over the last year is probably Saint Asonia. So for our listeners who aren't familiar with them, I'm sure most people are now. They're doing some big things. It's a super group with members of Finger 11, of Stain, originally with Finger 11, Stain, 3 Days Grace, I believe Dark New Day. They now have members of Thornley in there. There's lots of stuff going on. What can you say about your time with Saint Asonia? They're another band that, there's a lot of hype because of all the multi-platinum bands that the members have been a part of, but as a band themselves, they seem to be gaining a lot of traction, getting great placement on festivals, and even their own headline tours are doing very well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I just started working with those guys back in end of April into May, and we did a few week run of Canada. It's the first time I worked with them, and talked to them for quite a while about doing that. Yeah, it is cool. It's a great band. As you were mentioning, it started out, Rich from formerly of Finger 11 was the original drummer. And then Mike Mashaw from Stain is a big part of that. He's doing Stain right now. So Tavis Stanley has stepped in, which is the connection there is Tavis was in Art of Dying with Kale, which is Adam's cousin, who was in Thornley back in the day. And he was originally Barry's guitar tech from 3 Days Grace, and then their drummer Cody was in Art of Dying, right? So
it's just one big incestuous musical family,
right? But honestly, they're a great band. I really enjoy doing sound for them. I would say more so like than any of them, just by a little bit though. But that's really of my wheelhouse as far as mixing goes, and what I have in my heart and my guts of what I like, and honestly, what I play on guitar and write, it's very, very similar. So I really have a sense of being connected with the band on that level when I'm doing sound. I've had that conversation with Adam. I'm just like, I honestly feel like I'm up there with you guys. That's how it feels like at front of house. I get that same feeling because I've done both. I've been on stage, and get that feeling, and it feels the same, with a couple of bands like Finger 11's the same way, it's like, but it really hits home with them. Really, really like their song style. I love the way that Adam writes. Honestly, I've been waiting to work with Adam for 20 years. I told him that too. I had a good chuckle out of it, because he had no idea that I was a guitar player in Clarknova, until we already done a week of that tour. And then we were home for a couple of days, and he texted me at like midnight. He goes, "I just found out you were the guitar player in Clarknova. Like, who didn't like Johnny Under, right? The big single that Clarknova had, right? So it's very cool. A good connection with them. Happy to be working with them, and going back out with them in the late fall for a big run in the U.S. With Theory and Skillet, which is the second leg of the Rock Resurrection tour that they just did back in the early spring. So I'm really looking forward to that. We're just kind of going through and advancing things and getting their gear all straight I'm not with them on their fly out dates, which they have 3 or 4 this summer. Excuse me, but just getting some things together for them and helping them make sure those shows are successful, and then hop on a tour bus in the fall for a couple of months. And looking forward to that.
And you like Saint Asonia's music so much, you actually learned a few of their songs, didn't you, on guitar?
20 of their songs over the winter.
Yeah.
And I kind of I just being a player, I do that with the bands I work with. As I'm just because I do the deep dive listen on the tunes just to get all like the delay cues, and if there's anything the EQ structure that I should change live, on certain songs, right? So yeah, when I'm really digging the tune, the old fiddle comes out, and just started learning a bunch of their tunes, and just just so happened and like learned like 20 of them. It's cool. It's funny. And it's another conversation I had with Adam too, right? Because he kind of got wind of that, and he goes, "I heard you learned a bunch of our tunes," because he saw a couple of Instagram videos and I was playing their tunes just for fun and games, right? But it's like, yeah, there's something about actually learning the song and knowing it on that intimate level, like on my instrument of choice, right? Because there's a connection with guitar with me. There is a physical connection and an emotional connection with the instrument. So, by learning those tunes, I really feel like it feeds into what I'm doing physically at front of house and how I'm feeling about it emotionally. And I honestly feel like through osmosis, there's something that can like circulates through that back to them, to me, back out into the PA, that means something and adds to the sound of that show. And it may be minimal, I might be just crazy, but it's something, and it's something to me. And I try to at least learn little bits and pieces of each tune just to know the structure and to try and get that feeling going.
So I have one fan question, and then we'll dive into your 5 favorite albums. This was sent in from someone and someone that actually has a history with Finger 11. So Rich Meisner, who does video work, music videos for Finger 11 and Our Lady Peace. This guy's a legend in the video world when it comes to music videos. His question is, ask him about the epic lounge parties in the Flex. So I don't even know what that means. So Dan, what is this?
Yeah, I'm surprised he wants me to talk about this. I'll be nice here. So, going back to those 2 Finger 11 shows, the Toronto to Ottawa, obviously back to back, and we couldn't get a tour bus for it, so we really didn't sleep. So we all hopped into my Ford Flex, which is a 7-seater, and drove to Ottawa basically overnight. Got a little bit of sleep, and then into like an 8:30 or 9 a.m. load in the next day. So Rich was having a wonderful time in Toronto. And yeah, I think we all got into the band's rider except for me, because I was driving. But Rich was having a grand old time. And it was him and Jordan in the back seat. And they went on a pretty good tear for about 4 hours while we were driving, and it was quite hilarious. I can barely remember a couple of jokes that were told. There's probably 90% of them that I can't repeat if I could even remember them. But yeah, he was having a grand old time, So, but he woke up fresh as a daisy the next day, and we got to the gig, and yeah, it was a time.
That's such a rock and roll story, because when he's like, "Oh, talk about the parties in the back of the Flex," I'm thinking the Flex is like some high class nightclub or something,
Car, yeah. It's quite funny. Yeah, it was an entertaining drive, that's for sure.
That's too good. So let's dive into your 5 favorite albums. So I always have to have a disclaimer that my guests are such big music lovers that it is next to impossible to narrow down their favorite albums to just 5. So to make it easier for you, at the end of these 5, we'll have a honorable mention section where you can divulge all your favorite albums to give them a powerful shout out. But we'll start with these 5. Do you want to name the 5? Do you want me to name them? I have them in front of me.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll just start because it's kind of like a chronological order, I guess, for me, right? And really, I'm, man, just thinking of like, I guess it was probably 8 to 18 we're covering here. There's nothing after that because I'm basically going at this like the 5 albums that had the most like initial impact, and that changed my trajectory of, you know, just what I was into and what made me start playing guitar and the way I write and the way that, you know, what got me into, you know, production and all that. So that's kind of how I narrowed it down. So I'll just, I guess I'll start. The one that sticks out the most, of course, is Diary of a Madman by Ozzy Osbourne. This album's for me, I guess it was 7 years old. It's funny because I remember my brother was, you know, really into like the British metal like invasion. Like it was, you know, Black Sabbath, Ozzy, and Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, all that. And my mom did not want me listening to this stuff, right? And looking at the album covers or nothing. Like she, you know, made sure that my brother hid those records, right? So how that got discovered is that we were at my uncle's. So I was 7, maybe 8 years old, and I was looking through his albums, and I found Diary of a Madman, and it just stuck right out to me. You know, because I'd seen a couple of like Kiss and Gene Simmons, you know, the blood spitting and that, you know, I found it really intriguing. But that album cover with Ozzy, with all the torn clothes, with the cathedral castle background, he's covered in blood. He's basically, you know, he's this demonic figure. I was just like, it just struck a chord with me. So, you know, opened up the album. There's all the hieroglyphics and stuff, and it's. You know, I'm not an evil guy, but that evil persona just like, it just mesmerized me, right? And I think what really got to me was, even before I even listened to the album, is that my uncle said, hey, it's like, sneak that home if you can, basically. We'll put it in the car in the back seat, give it to your brother, because I know he's got the first Ozzy record, which is Blizzard of Oz. Right. But give this to your brother. He really likes Ozzy. I'm like, okay. Right. I don't think I gave it to my brother for like 3 or 4 days. You know, I just kept staring at it.
A little bit of a delay. Just
yeah. Delay. So with that, I remember that I was able to sneak into his room because he had a record player, and I put the record on and just sat there and listened to the whole record. And I just like, it blew my mind. And I think the thing that sticks out the most is that my uncle was talking about that record. He mentioned he's like, that guitar player had just passed away. He was just in a plane crash, right? And it's like that, you know, this album's going to be worth something one day or something, because it was brand new at the time, right? So he's like, yeah, give that your brother, it'll be worth something. A guitar player just died, right? Kind of thing. So that kind of, you know, piqued my interest too. I'm like, oh man, that sucks. This guy just died. So having that in my mind, and then listening to that record and hearing those guitar parts, and kind of just starting to understand what guitar was and all that, right? That just absolutely sealed the deal for me. Like, I need to play guitar. This guy is my favorite guitar player and probably will be forever, you know. And just listen through over and over and over again. And the tunes just totally stuck out to me. Like, the guitar work is phenomenal. And it's like the whole record is really phenomenal. Like Bob Daisley with his writing and with Ozzy's melodies and stuff. It was like, to believe that record was done, like written, recorded, and done and mixed in 30 days, you know, rushed, you know, and then out, you know, and to get those guys on the road for the Diary of a Madman tour in the US is just, it still blows my mind. You know, it is an absolute masterpiece, especially the song Diary of a Madman itself. It is Randy Rhoads', you know, like, here I am. This is what I do. It's an absolute masterpiece.
And that's the final song on the album, I believe, Diary of a Madman. It's a long one, right? It's like 6 minutes or something.
Yeah, almost 7, I think. Yeah. So it's a wonderful tune. It's like, and that's the thing, that album sparked my love for like the spooky interlude. You know, so any metal band or rock band that does that kind of breakdown, you know, like, you know, it's basically getting away from the song a little bit and creating like those cool little interludes, that hooks me every time, as long as it's good. And it, you know, I love that. And I think it's from that record, because there's a couple instances on that record, and sometimes there's just the guitar solos, but you know, so that take the song in a totally different direction. But it is like in Diary of a Madman, there's that interlude and that breakdown with the strings, in Ozzy, right? With those lyrics, and it's haunting. It's him talking to himself and trying to save himself from himself. And it's like, pretty crazy, and it's so quintessential Ozzy, like, the heavy metal madman. It's just, the song is absolutely perfect.
So Ozzy Osbourne, Diary of a Madman. This comes out in 1981. Are you saying that you actually didn't play guitar before owning this album?
Oh no, that's what made me want to play guitar at 7 years old, right? Because I only heard it. I only heard it, maybe it was late 82, 83. And then I started playing guitar in 87 because I begged for a guitar for Christmas for about 3 years, right? But you got to think, a 7-year-old at that time, just like, what are we getting for Christmas? A little Tonka truck and all that stuff, or a wrestling action figure or something like that. And I'm asking my mom to go spend $400, right? So it was only after like the 3 years or whatever, and I was 11, or I just said to my mom, it's like, and my buddy across the street got a guitar. I'm like, I need a guitar. Like, yeah, please get me one for Christmas. So, I got a little Fender Strat copy and a little tiny, 3-watt amp, and I was off and running. And I actually got in my stocking that year the Ozzy Osbourne, Randy Rhoads tribute on cassette. So I could get guitar and that record, or, at the same time, or cassette. So that was all hand in hand. That was me, cassette player, trying to do what I could to pick out little notes. And that's what started me on my guitar journey. So
that's amazing. So without this album, maybe you don't play guitar, or maybe you don't start as early as you did.
Yeah, or maybe without that album or a couple other ones that we'll mention, I wouldn't maybe got into music at all, as a profession. I think that's the thing. I was always into music, right? And hearing things like, Queen and Led Zeppelin and all that. And just, and my mom, spinning records. It was like Elton John, Beatles, and she loved the Bee Gees and all that stuff, and so music was always around. It was always getting played, but I don't know if I would have gone into it as a life journey and as an absolute passion in my career path without that record.
So a few episodes ago, I did the 5 favorite albums with John Wysocki, the original drummer from Stained, and he chose Ozzy Osbourne's Blizzard of Oz. So what's awesome is I got to do a deep dive into Ozzy and that album not too long ago. So it's like I'm going through the whole history of Ozzy, and what's cool is, Ozzy has all these albums over the years since then, but the two choices are the first and the second album, the two albums with Randy Rhoads, to show how much of an impact he had.
Well, that's the whole thing. It's great. You're fully schooled on Randy Rhoads now. Listen to those 2 records, right? So that's a good thing. But yeah, it's just without Randy and without those 2 records in that short period of time, like, who knows if Ozzy even would have been anything, honestly. Like, Ozzy has his own merit, and he was successful with Black Sabbath, and he had a big fan base, but it really was, Randy Rhoads in conjunction with like Bob Daisley that made his career. Like, if he picked the wrong guys and just, and then the record label didn't like the record and he would have got dropped, who knows? He probably would have drank himself to death, right, in that hotel room that he was in when he met Randy Rhoads through Dana Strum from the band Slaughter. Went and, got Ozzy from his hotel room and brought him down to the studio, and, and he was a mess. And, if that didn't all happen, who knows?
Yeah, all of music history would have shifted. So it's hard to think about. So this album, there's only 8 songs, so it's just straight to the point, all killer, no filler. And then another album you have on the list is Metallica's Master of Puppets, which is also just 8 songs. Dan, is 8 songs the perfect amount for an album?
I guess. Well, that's the thing. That was the length of like an LP back then. They couldn't really, depending on the song lengths. Right. And you got to think songs were a little bit longer back then, right, too, right? So they can only fit a certain amount of songs on the actual record LP, right? So it's kind of cool going back and listening to those and how short they are. It is kind of like you said, all killer, no filler. It's short and sweet, and the songs just pound out. They're done 8 songs. You're not listening to, 14, 15, 16 songs, right? Like when was the thing when CD came around, the band started putting out some 15, 16 songs. It's almost be too much, right?
Yeah, so a CD you can have like 80 minutes or 84 minutes or something, and Tool literally goes down to like the final 17 seconds. They use up the entire amount to show people taking advantage of the runtime.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's interesting, just how that that media format and how it changed kind of the landscape of how bands approach records and what they can do. It's I kind of like that old format of just like 8-10 songs, and in and out and done. But that's just because of what I grew up on, right? And that's what I got used to. But all good.
It seems like the album cycles nowadays, or for the last while, it's about two years. Like you release an album, you tour behind it, and then after 2 years, you release the next one and you restart. Back in the day, it's like, man, bands were releasing an album like every year and a half. And I wonder if the shorter, like 8-song album helped that it's less songs, so more frequently you're releasing the albums. Do you think there's any truth to that?
I think there is, but you got to think too, and especially when you go back and read about how these bands like approach these records and what they were doing, right? A lot of them did write 12, 13, 15 songs, right? And pick the best 8 or 9, right? So they're still writing a good amount of tunes, but I think because of that pressure being off, like, and just if a band was able to, it's like definitely these 8 songs, like there was, and that's all that we can fit on the record. It's like, those are the definite 8. Like there was nothing. It's not like they, had some choices of a couple of songs that were kind of maybe filler or that they wrote in the studio or kind of last minute, kind of thing. So definitely, I think it hasn't had an effect on it for sure. Yeah.
So the album had 3 singles: Flying High Again, Over the Mountain, and Tonight. It sells over 3 million copies, so it's a big hit. I wanted to share a quick review that AllMusic had. They said it's not uncommon to find fans who prefer Diary to Blizzard, since it sets an even more mystical, eerie mood, and since Rhodes' playing is progressing to an even higher level. Do you agree with that, of this album over Blizzard?
Somewhat. This is always a hard choice for me because I love it all, right? To go back to Blizzard for a second, there is some like just crazy song, like Crazy Train, like Mr. Crowley, Goodbye to Romance, like, and his guitar work, like Revelation Mother Earth, like just an absolute opus of guitar amazingness, right? And you listen to those layers, right? The one thing that Diary did, it's almost just like you said, it brought a mystique, and there's an energy there, and I think that has all to do with the short time frame that they had to do that record. Because you think about it, like Ozzy brought Randy over to England and lived with him for a year and wrote this record, started writing, and then Bob Daisley getting involved, about halfway through, and starting to get on writing lyrics and melodies with Ozzy and stuff, and finalizing that record. So they had a full year versus 30 days, to basically get in the studio, write some songs for a couple of weeks and lay them down. Right. So there is an energy and an aura to that. And that is Randy just laying it all on the line, cause he knew that pressure was on him. That's the thing that's, I think all good musicians that have the right, headspace do well under pressure. I know, some of my best shows I've done, playing wise and mostly doing live sound in front of houses when I'm under pressure and we have limited time, because I just go in there and just heave ho, get that gear set up in like 10 minutes, get it to front of house, and there's an energy to it. So I totally agree with that statement that, that there is an elevated aura to the Diver Madman record. Even still with that, like some of the guitar solos on there, like Randy wasn't overly happy with, he's like, they're fine for what it is. He would have loved to have done more, but basically there's a couple of solos on there that are just, they're ghost solos. He laid it down, say, okay, that's where I'm going to do a solo.
It's a placeholder for now.
Placeholder, right? Like the end of Tonight, the song Tonight on that record, it's just him ripping, and he's like, okay, that's fine, and we'll, I'll get back to it. I didn't have time to get back to it. So, and that's the thing, that song fades out. If you keep popping the volume up as that song's fading out, and you got to watch it before the next tune comes in. But you hear at the very end, he's just going for it. And it's almost, it's like some of Randy's best, because he's just ripping and it's perfect. And the notes are amazing. And it's like screaming at you. It's awesome.
So, in doing my research for the Blizzard of Oz deep dive, I learned all this stuff about Randy Rhoads, and I actually commented. You had posted something about Randy Rhoads, I think, or Ozzy, and I had put in, "Oh my god, I learned that I thought I like stumped you, I'm like, oh my god, did you know that Randy Rhoads at 16 started the band Quiet Riot that has gone on to be a huge metal band?" I had no idea, and you're like, buddy, like anything Randy Rhoads, I know. So I didn't know that. So the question is, how insane is it that between the ages of 16 and 25, when he passes away, he starts Quiet Riot, that goes on to be a huge metal band selling millions of albums. He does, I believe, 2 albums with them. And then he does the two quintessential Ozzy Osbourne albums. And with his guitar playing on the Ozzy albums and Crazy Train, he basically popularized that two-handed tapping style of guitar along with Eddie Van Halen around that time. How crazy is it what he accomplished in such a small time frame in his life?
Well, it's absolutely nuts, and that's why he's an absolute legend. When he died, he was still a kid, basically. As a 48-year-old dude now, looking back, he's just a kid. Starting Quiet Riot at 16. This is the thing, they really pounded the pavement too, and as you remember, maybe if you've done any research on that, like they got a small record deal out of Japan, but they really they were pounding the pavement to no record deal and to minimal success other than local Hollywood scene. They were rock stars in Hollywood, right? So that's a thing for Randy to leave that, and and there's lots of stories about how it broke his heart to do that because that was his baby band. He started it with Kevin DeBro, and it upset them all. But Randy, there's a calling for him. I think he knew that, and he had to take that chance. And but it is crazy to think that he started that all up, went to Ozzy, did 2 records right quick. Unfortunately dies. And those records have gone on to be absolute legendary records that'll never go away. That changed the landscape of hard rock and metal, especially in the 80s and beyond. And that's the thing. And with Quiet Riot, that story, that Randy was in that band, I'm sure that's what led to, a bit of their popularity and push in the record label, signing them, is that they were, basically placed in the scene because of that, that name, and Randy Rhoads being tied to that and went on to great success, So it's nuts to think of what that guy did in 10 years is what, a lot of other guitar players can do in multiple lifetimes.
So I have a couple reviews about the album, and then we'll move on to a different choice. So BBC Music referred to the album as a classic rock record in every way, lifted out of the ordinary by the legendary rock axe god Randy Rhoads. And then Canadian journalist Martin Popoff called Diary of a Madman a lasting classic that stands as the definitive showcase for Randy Rhoads. And then Rolling Stone placed it at number 15 on its list of 100 greatest metal albums of all time. So that's what I got for Ozzy Osbourne, Diary of a Madman. And I guess my last question is, you've seen Ozzy live before, obviously not with Randy Rhoads because of how long ago he passed away and how young you were. But what was it like seeing Ozzy live, who was like a hero of yours growing up? How early did you see him?
First Ozzy show, I was 13, I believe. Hold on, let me do the math here. Yeah, I think it was 12 or 13. Yeah, I went with my brother down to CNE Grandstand, and it was Zakk Wylde's first tour. So Zakk was 20. I'm a little year-old kid, and so it was the No Rest for the Wicked tour with White Lion opening. Another fantastic guitar player, Vito Bratta. Yeah, just when Ozzy came out, I'm seeing my brain just, I'm like, there he is. Like, I'm a 13-year-old kid, and then Zakk coming out, and very easy to tell who he is, right? Because he had the long blonde hair, very kind of Randy Rhoads look alike, and that's why I liked him too, right? Because he was a Randy freak, and he had that Randy aura a little bit about him, and the bullseye guitar, Les Paul, right? So he came out, and I'd already listened to that record, probably 1,000 times before I saw that show. So yeah, that's probably life changing at that point. I think I'd been to a couple of concerts already. I think it was at Bon Jovi once already, and I saw Cinderella, if you remember them back in the 80s. So it was probably my 3rd concert ever, and just mind blowing to see Ozzy live. Like, he's a legend, he's the king of heavy metal, right? And so
And you've seen him like 10 times or something. You've seen him a bunch.
I think I told you 10 earlier, but I probably 15 or 16 times like since then. I don't think I missed one show. He did Osmosis tour, and he was playing at the Government, which is a small venue for him because it's all about arenas. But I think that's the grunge era and all stuff. And Osmosis was not a big splash record for him, right? So he was playing at the Government, and I missed that show. I was away or I was working or something, So I've only missed one.
It's funny when you say, I've seen him probably 10 times. It sounds like someone's probably exaggerating, but you're actually underselling it, that you had seen him actually quite a bit more than that.
Probably have. I got to count them, but it's probably more, a dozen or more.
So I've seen Ozzy, but it was when Rick Rubin brought Black Sabbath out of retirement for that 13 album. So I saw Black Sabbath live in Ottawa with Ozzy. So that's the only time I've seen him.
Yeah, that was cool too. I remember going to see that, and I actually saw it was the 98 reunion, I believe, 98 or 99, the first one. And that concert was at Skydome with Pantera and Deftones opening.
Wow, Deftones too.
Yeah, well, crazy show. Unbelievable, because Pantera, like Deftones are great. Pantera came out and just lit it up. And and then it comes Black Sabbath, and like the chandeliers come down, the song Black Sabbath plays, the bell goes, there's like the smoke, and then Ozzy just raises out of the ground, right? This microphone, just like goosebumps. I'm getting them now, right? Thinking about it, like, yeah. So yeah, Ozzy's the man. He's always been a pillar of my respect, and I love for the whole industry kind of evolves around him, because he's just the craziest heavy metal entertainer that's ever existed, and no one's ever going to change that.
So for our listeners, I'm just going to list off the other 4 albums so they know what to expect, what we're going to dive into. So we just went over Ozzy Osbourne's Diary of a Madman. The other 4 albums: Guns N' Roses, Appetite for Destruction, Alice in Chains, Facelift, Motley Crue, Shout at the Devil, and Metallica, Master of Puppets. Is there a specific album you want to dive into next, or
going chronological order? Mace also Shout at the Devil.
Okay.
Shortly after, like kind of getting into Ozzy and stuff, that's probably within a couple of months, I would say, buddy across the street came over with a cassette, and it's like, hey, check this band out. We're just hanging out doing kid stuff. We're 8 years old, and puts on Shout at the Devil, and by listening to the record, how the intro in the beginning, and set, once again the apocalyptic kind of evil sound comes up, and there's that big speech, right? And it really sets a tone for that sound, and not knowing to expect hearing that, and then hearing that, the tune Shout the Devil, that big boom, 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 hit, and the drums is hitting on those half notes, right there. I was like, what the hell is this? Right?
And the cover has a pentagram too, right? It's all the same imagery and sound. Yeah.
And this is the thing, is it's like on the cassette version, it was like the inner picture. So it's just a picture of Nikki and Vince, Tommy and Mick, on the cassette. So the pentagram wasn't on the cassette, right? So you see a picture of them, and I'm like, what are these guys? What is the sound? I got to think, I'm 8 years old, never heard of these guys before. Heard a little bit of like, the thing is, in the Kiss, there's a little bit of Ozzy, and then these guys come, just like bat out of hell, out of LA, and it's just with this crazy kind of new sound. It's a little bit familiar, it's that heavy metal sound, but there's something different about it, especially with the song like Shout the Devil, right? And the higher vocal events and stuff, which is, at first I was like, I don't know if I like this or not, right? But it grew on me, right? But it was more about just the sound of the record, and it's like the guitar playing, like Mick Mars, man, like just had that wall of Marshall sound, but it was that and the imagery, and just the overall sound of that record, and just that vibe that it just created. Like all those bands that were coming out, like, at that time, like, and I'm talking, we were like within weeks of each other, I'm starting to hear all these bands. Like it was a really short period of time. I heard it was them. And then, you hear like a rat, and then it was like Dawkins and come out, and that whole LA scene, was busting wide open. Wasp, which are one of my favorite bands too, right? Loved Blackie Lawless and Wasp when I was a kid, and that was just all exploding at that time. And out of all those bands, you can't deny that Motley Crue were the absolute kingpin leaders of LA, crazy LA rock, heavy metal scene. It really changed the landscape for sure.
Yeah, so this is the band's second album. This is considered the big breakthrough. It goes on to sell over 5 million copies and made them kind of the face of that 80s heavy metal scene. You were talking about Mick here. So, when I think of Mick Mars, or when I think of Motley Crue, I don't think of this incredible guitar playing. But when listening to this whole album, there's like really tasty guitar work on here, and there's some good solo work as well.
Absolutely. It's the thing. He's kind of like this hidden gem. It was the perfect thing for them because he's just got this heavy-handed like swap about him. There's a thing with the guitar players. It's like, there's guys that are good overall players, right? But we'd say, man, that guy's left hand is something else. That guy's right hand, oh my God. And that's the thing. It's like Mick is that right hand guy, which is like, other guys down, we'll talk about this guy in a bit, but Jerry Cantrell, right hand guy, and this is the thing, there's not a lot of super flash on the left hand. It's not about like, this sweet picking and every note is absolutely flawless, perfect, but there's a right hand, and I just call it a swap or a weight. And that's what Mick Mars has. And he just had amazing riffs, it's, you get a little idea from Nikki Sixx that was, Nikki Sixx was more of a songwriter back then, more he would be a player, and he'd, just be picking out like one finger and a couple of notes, and Mick Mars would take that and just riff on top of it and make those songs what they are, or at least open the door to what they were going to be. Right. But yeah, like, again, Mick Mars in that band, totally different band, might not be, what it was, and they might not be the kings of that, of that little era at that time, right? They could have just been, they could have been popular, but maybe they just would have been, it's another little cog in the wheel with a guy like that.
So as we go, we're going to see a thread that runs through all your albums. Like, they all tie into each other in different ways. And for the promotion of this album, Motley Crue was on tour with Ozzy. And what's crazy is the rest of the guys in Motley Crue outside of Mick, they were asking Ozzy's band members if they should replace Mick. So, there's rumors that they've been trying to replace Mick this whole time. They were saying that they were looking for someone more technically great on the guitar than Mick. And it was the bass player who you've mentioned already for Ozzy, I believe.
Right. Go ahead.
Yeah, they were asking him, and he said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like, they were having such success with Shout at the Devil, and they're like, what are you doing? And apparently it's because of Ozzy's bass player that was the voice of reason that kept him in the band. Had he said something different, they might have replaced him.
Yeah, Bob Daisley, who was on, basically recorded both those records for Ozzy with Randy. Yeah, he's quoted as saying that, like, he was approached by the band, be like, who do you know, kind of thing. It's like, why would you get rid of Mick Mars? It's like, really, I don't know what he said. I haven't, dove deep enough to know exactly what he said to those guys. But, he, as a good musician and a songwriter and a guy, in multiple bands and more of a veteran at that point, he would be very easy to see that Mick Mars is probably the best musician in the band. Not taking
They should be replacing everyone else. Yeah.
Well, then that's the thing, and you couldn't have at that point. Like, that's, they obviously realized that they were being idiots, and replace Mick Mars. That could have really just, that could have killed their career, But yeah, to not take anything away from Nicky, he had his, his aura about him. That's the thing. He was more of an aura and the rock star and the presence of that band, like, and that leader. Right. And you get Tommy, the crazy drummer, phenomenal drummer. We all were like, Tommy Lee is the best drummer, everyone when we were kids. Right. And he really was. He was just such a showman, heavy handed, playing really cool stuff, really awesome fills. We loved it, But yeah, there was no one replaceable at that point in the band. There really never is. The whole thing, it's like, to go on a little bit about it now. Like John Five's in the band now. There's all the drama with Mick, which drives me crazy. I kind of feel like they're ruining their legacy a little bit. You know, the John Fives is an incredible guitar player, one of my favorites, right? But you know, replacing anybody in Motley Crue, like, what the point? Just don't do it at all. Just go do something else, you know.
Yeah, Mick has he's had, you know, the health issues with his back since he was 17. And I saw Motley Crue in Montreal, I don't know, 15 years ago. And even then he was like completely bent over, and I'm sure it's gotten worse since then. Yeah, I guess they just announced last year officially that he won't be touring with the band anymore. And apparently he's getting 5% of the upcoming tour that he's not even on, like basically like a parting gift. And you know, that tour is going to make tens of millions of dollars, so 5% is pretty good. But
yeah, by all means he should be, right? He has, you know, endured a lot over the years. He's probably put up with a lot of crap, you know, because of especially back in the day, you know. And so I'm sure there's still, you know, those guys are all older and they're cleaned up and healthy and all that stuff. I'm sure the drama still continues, right? I can only imagine, right? But Mick has always seemed like that guy, you know, and there's a lot of support around him for this, where he's just been kind of the rock and like kind of the dad of the band a little bit, right? So yeah, by all means, he should be compensated for the rest of his life for what he's put into that band, 100%. And it's, you know, it's kind of too bad they're going through a bunch of drama and stuff. It just would have been nice, like when they did that big farewell, you know, cease and desist order, you know, the contract and all that. You should have just left it at that. You know, they made enough money, but hey, I'm not there.
yeah, my understanding is he's quite a bit older than the other members, and way back at the start he was the stability, like he's the one that got the funding for the demos. He's the one, like without him, apparently it's like the name of the band, all that stuff goes back to him. And for he says since like the 80s they've been trying to get rid of him, and it's like he's been the rock this whole time.
All right, you know, it's funny to hear all that stuff. Well, not maybe it's not funny, but it's kind of crazy to hear that down at the end of the day when he's out of the band and then all the stuff comes out of the woodwork, right? It's like, wow, if we would have known back then, it's like we have had, you know, the respect for that band still, you know, if we heard all this back then, right? And, you know, you never know, because people do. It's not just about the music, man. It's, for me anyway, it's like I need to like the band members, and, you know, because when they're, you know, not good human beings, then the music kind of, it wanes, right? It's not as special to you when someone's a dick.
One thing that was kind of shocking to me when listening to this album is when I see the album, so it's called Shout at the Devil. When the song Shout at the Devil starts playing, it's like, oh yeah, like that is Motley Crue. Like to me, that song is Motley Crue. And when I look, the 3 official singles from that album are Looks That Kill, the Beatles cover Helter Skelter, and Too Young to Fall in Love. That Shout at the Devil, their signature song, wasn't even officially a single at that time. And it looks like over the years it had charted to like number 38 or something, like never a significant single. But I associate that song with the band. Do you remember that being like a single, or like how did we get to the point where people associate that song with the band like it's their biggest hit?
Yeah, it's funny. I think it just takes its time, right? Especially being an album track, right? And then people, it's like a deeper listen. It's almost just like they would back then. It would happen a lot. Like they'd have that one like impact tune, right? And then get into the single. It's almost like it was like a setup, like a little lobby. But here you go. Here's this aggressive kind of crazy weird song, right? It's not necessarily a radio hit, you know, because the chorus is maybe, you know, they don't think it's as catchy as some other ones, but it's, you know, it's that one should lead off the record. And then all of a sudden, yeah, it's, you know, Shout the Devil, boom, and right into Looks Like Kill It, like have that, you know, that great riff, you know, and just builds up a little bit. And the chorus is great, you know, big anthem, LA craziness, you know, so yeah, it is funny. A lot of bands did do that back in the day, right? And just wouldn't put their first single out as, you know, the album track. You know, maybe they thought it was gonna, you know, too much attention and kind of kill it off too quick or something like that, right? They wanted to, you know, spread out the wealth a little bit, so to speak.
To further cement your point about the kind of the image they were portraying. So you had it's called Shout at the Devil. There's a song Shout at the Devil. There's the intro, there's the pentagram. And then what's funny is their cover of the Beatles song Helter Skelter. Helter Skelter is like the most controversial Beatles song there is because of the association with Charles Manson and those murders. So it's kind of funny that that's the song they picked as well, which goes right in there with the image they were portraying.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's probably easy for them. It's like, hey, we should do a cover of, Helter Skelter, because I'm sure they're all Beatles fans, right? And to be perfect for this vibe, because that's the thing. It's not just as I stumbled upon that. It was like, that was really a vision of Nikki Sixx, like kind of getting into that stuff, right? Getting in a bit of like witchcraft and reading some like novels and something, getting in that dark broody kind of thing. And it just kind of came out of him in in the way that he was writing, right? So it was like kind of an aura surrounding them, right? You can hear it in all the songs. Like some of the tunes get away, like Looks Like Kill. It's really not so much demonic, but it's still got that overtone of like, this wicked chick kind of thing, and the video really portrays that too. This girl leader, and they're basically in a fight with her, and she's kind of beating them all up and stuff. It's kind of funny. And you get into songs like Danger, which is a really cool song at the end of the record, right? And it's like, saying you're in danger when the boys are around, this is Hollywood. And it's a really kind of like more graphic, kind of gross, at the end of the day. But that LA rock scene. It did make everybody feel a little bit uncomfortable, right? That's what everybody was digging, and it gave everybody that kind of it was that mystique, right?
So nowadays we're used to albums having labels that warn you that there's disturbing content or swearing or those things. That's normal. This started back around this album. So this is Tipper Gore back in 1983. He targeted their song Bastard as an example of why there should be labels on CDs. So it's kind of funny that they're the start of that warning label.
Really are. Yeah. And then just a lot of them took a lot of heat. I remember Twisted Sister took a lot of heat, and actually there's a famous court hearing that he went
to. How intelligent he is. And
yeah. And it was funny because like, I remember first seeing that when I was pretty young. And I was like, oh my God, this is so amazing. Because it's like, you think this guy, he dressed down a little bit from what Dee Snider, if you've seen Twisted Sister, of course, back in the day, like it's all this crazy Philly stuff and studs and leather and that. And he walks in like in a jean shirt and, it's all denim, and there's kind of down sunglasses. And he just gives this speech that absolutely decimates, their whole rhetoric and what Tipper Gore brought to this whole trial kind of thing. And then, so they settled that the records didn't get banned, but that was what they settled with, was that the PMRC label, basically, which only made kids go out and get their older brothers or their parents to just go get that record more anyway, right? So it's kind of funny how that worked out. It led to a lot more album sales for all those bands. It really did.
So during the tour cycle behind Shout at the Devil, this is where they became famous and notorious for their bad behavior. They became like the poster boys of every, bad behaved band after that. And I have a few stories that I want to read here that are crazy. So while they're recording, Nikki Sixx gets involved in a serious car crash because he was drunk and he stole a friend's Porsche in LA. So just I'm creating a scene here. Okay. So the drunk driving with the Porsche, then they're on tour supporting Kiss. And you think Kiss is like the craziest of all the bands. After just 5 shows with Kiss kicks off Motley Crue from the tour for bad behavior. So if Kiss is telling you you have bad behavior, your behavior has to be just completely insane. And then I'm going to read through a paragraph here. So in 1984, they joined the Monsters of Rock Festival with Van Halen and AC/DC. And Vince Neil and Tommy Lee both bit members of AC/DC and Van Halen, like actually bit to show how crazy they were. Those two bands are so furious. They want Motley Crue kicked off the tour, but Motley Crue is so big at that time that they're having trouble getting them removed. And
Or just be like, no way am I going to kick him off this tour.
Yeah. And this is insane. So this is what the promoter came up with to keep them on the bill. This, I don't even know how they pull this off. The promoter came up with an unusual solution. Motley Crue would enter their trailer immediately upon arrival at the concert venue, and a large crane would then lift the trailer several meters off the ground to prevent the band members from leaving and causing trouble prior to their performance. They physically have to lift them out of harm's way.
I've never heard that story. That's crazy. That's perfect, though. What a great story.
Yeah, that's nuts. And then there's a couple other things. They'd be required to leave the concert venue as soon as they were done performing. They also had to pay a $15,000 deposit before any hotel would allow them to stay because of how notorious their partying is. And then their manager also made each member submit to him a list of everything they had destroyed in a hotel before he allowed them to check out.
Unreal.
Just insanity.
Yeah, they were the Hollywood bad boy, crazy, drug-fueled nut bars, right? It's like, that's the thing. It's like in that scene with that influence, throwing a bunch of kids, millions of dollars, basically, like they're all 21 years old, making $1 million on a rock and roll tour, popular as heck, yeah. Insanity. Yeah. There's probably, I've heard a lot of stories. It's funny. I've never heard that one with the crane. That's a good one.
Yeah, that crane thing is just great. Just to even think of that, like, look, I got them under control because I will physically have them lifted in the air where they cannot hurt anybody else. So I have a few reviews. So Rolling Stone has the album 44th on their list of 100 greatest metal albums of all time. All Music referred to the album as their best, displaying Motley Crue's sleazy and notorious, yet quite entertaining metal at its best. Pop Matters called the album a sleazy and menacing, timeless LA metal classic. In their opinion, the album contained the band's best singles and remains to this day Motley Crue's finest hour. And last but not least, Ultimate Classic Guitar gave much praise to the album, calling it the ultimate LA glam metal album. And they called the band the first heavy metal band to truly cross over from the male to female audience, which automatically doubled the band's fan base building prospects. So that's what I've got for that album.
So, very true and well-written statements, because it's exactly what that is, and that whole thing with the female crossover, that's what it was at the time too. Like when I was, in late grade school and getting into high school, that was the thing, right? It was just as many girls liking heavy metal that it was guys, that was the thing. I really didn't know a lot of people really that listened to much else, right? Because it was just the music, the popular music of that time. Yeah, because we know when you go to a metal show, it's basically you and a bunch of sweaty guys essentially. So for Motley Crue to have equal guy and girl is a big deal. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's pretty intense back then, that's for sure. Yeah, I really love the Crue.
So let's dive into the third album on your list of 5 favorite albums. So if we're going in order, is it Metallica next or a different album?
I'd say Metallica next, because it was shortly after hearing Motley Crue, basically.
Okay, so Metallica, Master of Puppets. This comes out in 1986. Why does this album mean so much to you?
That was a huge heavy metal cultural shift, for myself and all my buddies. And I was starting to really get it, the inkling that I was going to play guitar, and I was already begging my mom, like we were talking about earlier, about getting a guitar. So hearing this album, hearing it through and through for the first time, it's just like, it was just heavier, sound and faster and meaner, and a crazy, aggressive vocal. That's the thing that drew me to it. I think the most. James Hetfield's vocal was just, just here in your face, so, and yeah, just the way that it's recorded, the guitar sounds is great. Just like Marshalls on absolute full blast, double tracked kind of thing. And just in that writing style, like it had a real mystique to it, and that's the common theme with all this stuff in the 80s. And that I kind of miss nowadays is just, it was true mystique, not to the band themselves, but to the writing and how the chord work and the melodies, all melted together. Right. I don't know if that's just because I was young and impressionable and hearing this stuff for the first time, but there was a magic back then that I don't find out of new bands this day and age, right? But yeah, another thing I really liked about them too, they, and not just the album itself, but the imagery of them were so simple. They looked like us, it was Nike high tops, ripped jeans, just a leather jacket, and a Misfits t-shirt, and that's it. And they go up on stage, it was like, hey, it just brought it more home and brought it more street back in, but they were heavier and meaner, than all these other bands I was listening to. I'm like, this is such a huge shift, it intensified things, but it simplified things at the same time. And that's why that was such a shift for me listening to it, and just Metallica in general, not just that record, but then going to the back catalog and hearing Kill 'Em All and Ride the Lightning, saying, what a neat band, right? These guys are really changing things up.
So officially there is only one single, just Master of Puppets, but it does have two other songs that most people know. So there's a Battery and Welcome Home Sanitarium. So I'd say those three songs are pretty well known to the general public, despite just Master of Puppets being the single.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Battery, it's just like, how intense, more intense can you get than Battery, right? Even just in the name itself, right? As being battered or whatever. But yeah, it's a crazy good song. And that's the thing is, I remember the next year, basically after that record came in and getting a guitar, just like trying to play that stuff. And it was just like, so the picking and all down picking, it was so fast and it was so hard to do. Right. And I love that tune. And that's the thing in Sanitarium. What a great tune. Going back to that whole mystique is a bit of a story, but someone trying to break free and being caught within themselves. And it's going to see a theme here, because it's like, yeah, with the stuff that I like, because I love that stuff when people talk, put in lyric form, going inwards instead of just talking about something, that they're witnessing. They're talking about things within themselves. So it was always the more powerful, more emotional songs that can connect to people. And I love that vibe. And that's the thing. A song like Welcome Sanitarium has that. What a great tune. And there's the thing with the going back to guitar and all that too, is Sanitarium, kind of a cool, easier song to learn. So that's kind of what drew me in as well, because I was starting to learn guitar, and that was an easy one to learn. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can play Welcome Home Sanitarium, right? And I learned it pretty easily and just got super excited about it, right?
So the album came out and instantly it had widespread critical acclaim for the music, for the political lyrics. It's regarded as one of the greatest and most influential metal albums of all time. Essentially, anytime you see a list of the best metal albums of all time, it's in the top three, like always. It's like there wouldn't be the mainstream genre since then without this album.
Yeah, there's no way it can't be in the top three or top five. Like, it's number one for a lot of people, right? Because it's not only just like, just how good those songs were and how, aggressive that the band was. And it's just, this is that big shift, it's just, it opened the door for basically, that kind of more thrashy metal sound, which evolved into many different genres of metal. Like as much of what Black Sabbath did, like basically inventing heavy metal, like, you can't help but say Metallica was that next band for that secondary, more like even just as important cultural shift in metal was that album, like, and just Metallica in general. But that album is really, that big one that made, people really notice that there was a different direction in heavy metal happening. And a lot of bands went that route.
And despite it having virtually no airplay, no radio play, no music videos, it sells 500,000 copies in its first year. It becomes the first thrash metal album to go platinum, to sell 1 million copies. And since then, it's gone on to sell over 10 million copies. So this was like a changing of the guard when it came out.
Absolutely. It was just everything changed, got to think of at that time. It was all, heavy metal was basically the LA glam, scene, and earlier, like 70s, late 70s, early 80s, like a British invasion of metal, Silk Design, Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, still going, all those bands, right? They were that one big shift that basically right up in between the middle between those two genres. Metallica just bulldozed right through, right, and really changed things up. It was very refreshing and fun changed my guitar playing. It's like it went from just kind of riffy, high riffy and lead guitar to like the lower string metal double picking, and doing all that stuff, right? And yeah, it really changed things up a lot.
So one thing that I discovered about this album that's shocking, I think, as a Metallica fan, I think I know most of the history. Apparently Lars was in talk with Geddy Lee from Rush to produce the album. And if the schedules align between Metallica and Rush, Geddy Lee would have produced that album.
That's hilarious. I've never heard.
Isn't that the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard?
That is kind of crazy. That's right from Lars. It's not just like a rumor or something like that. It's right from Lars. Yeah,
it's from Lars, is what I can see, and that I guess some of the influence is this album. Metallica started to go a little more prog, like a little more Rush influence, if that makes any sense. So,
oh, it definitely did. Right. You can hear it in the riffing and stuff, and it's just like there's some weird little timing turnarounds and stuff where Kill 'Em All, Ride the Lightning is a 4 on the floor, kind of just pedal to the metal kind of thing. That one was, tempo changes, a little bit like weird dynamic changes and stuff. You could see they were starting to branch it, because that's the thing. They were just becoming better musicians at that point, I think, because they were just finally doing it professional for a number of years. Because the first 2 records are just trying their best to break the market and all that stuff. And then they're going like, Master of Puppets and stuff, or, at the end of, Ride the Lightning, touring constantly and becoming better musicians. Right. So that's nuts to hear. I've never heard that.
We'll have to verify that. I saw that, but it's, you never know what's fake news, but if that's true, that's like some crazy history there.
How interesting would that have been, with the writing that they were doing, but, where Geddy would have pushed them. Very interesting.
Yeah. So the album was a high point for Metallica, but it was also a low point. This is the last album with the bass player Cliff Burton, right? There was the tragic bus accident, and that shifted into, they have Jason Newsted after that for a few albums, and then eventually they have Robert Trujillo. I have a quote here from bassist Robert Trujillo, who's been Metallica's bass player since after Some Kind of Monster, I believe. And this is what he says. So he cites Master of Puppets as his actual favorite album from the band. He says, "I feel Master of Puppets has a lot of everything. It's got instrumentals. It's got great songs, great riffs. It's got one of my favorite songs ever by Metallica, and that's Disposable Heroes. So anytime I hear that particular song, count me in. Battery is an amazing song. So it's just got everything that I love about Metallica." So you get an approval from Metallica's current bass player.
Yeah, that's, it's a great record. Yeah, but Disposable Heroes, what a tune. Just like that, the double bass kick, that's the thing that kind of made me and my buddies go crazy. It's just that guitar and going in that the double kick, just slamming, right? It's kind of funny because it's like I think Lars struggles with it a little bit these days live, but they try to do it right because they know it's a fan favorite. So don't blame him for that being his favorite Metallica album, because it's no denying how important that record was, for sure. And that all the instrumental stuff, and all the interludes and stuff. Like James Hetfield is one of the best, interlude writers. Like it's, for breakdowns and shifting songs and basically from, just connecting parts together. It's just brilliant.
And we keep seeing how Ozzy is showing up in every story here, right? Because it's like the godfather of heavy metal. And where did Robert Trujillo come from? He was Ozzy's bass player before Metallica.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and there you go. Right, and Ozzy's if we're talking about heavy metal in general, Ozzy's always going to sneak in there somewhere. And I think too, it's Metallica. One of their bigger breaks for touring is the Ultimate Sin tour for Ozzy, and it was the album cycle for Master of Puppets, and Metallica was opening. I think it was the US tour. I don't know if it was overseas too, but they had a good long chunk of time on the road with Ozzy. Right. So that would have been a crazy tour too, because Ozzy was still being nuts, and the band was, Metallica, just getting this newfound fame and, partying. It must have been a crazy tour too. Not as crazy as the Motley Crue tour, I'm sure, with Ozzy, but definitely another crazy tour.
There are levels to crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. Many.
Were you in the loop at all with Metallica's song "Master of Puppets" being in Stranger Things in the season 4 finale?
It just came up, right? Because you'd see all these little, I don't follow TikTok or anything like that, but that leaks into like Instagram, like little TikTok videos and stuff. And it was just, why am I seeing like pictures or videos of
Some guy playing it? Yeah.
yeah, it's like why is Master of Puppets everywhere, right? And actually, my daughter actually was playing guitar one night, and she came in. She's like, "Do you know Master of Puppets?" Right? And I'm
You're like kind of proud and like kind of yeah.
so she's like, "Oh wow, you do." And I was like, "I learned that 30 years ago, yeah, or more, 35, I think now." But yeah, it's funny. It's a resurgence with a whole new demographic and in the kids, right? And to maybe a lot of kids that wouldn't listen to Metallica, maybe, right? Because it's just, who knows? But yeah, crazy.
It's funny. Sometimes there's promotion that you just can't buy, like things that just naturally go viral. And Stranger Things is like one of the biggest shows of all time. Like the numbers on Netflix are like astronomical. And I had enough people that were telling me I need to watch it. So I went from the start and watched all 4 seasons. And first season's amazing. Second and third are okay. And then they nail fourth season is awesome. And it's the finale of the fourth season, which is like a great season. It's at its peak of popularity, and it's like the final moments, like the biggest moments of the show. The main character is playing Master of Puppets, and apparently the actual actor learned the song on guitar to do it properly. And there's videos of like Metallica loves this. Like the song has charted as a legit hit that it never was back in the day when it was underground. So it's like renewed sales, renewed airplay, and there's videos of Metallica with that actor. Like they had him come out to their concerts, and I don't know if he's gone on stage to play with them, but he plays it backstage with them, and they're like, holy shit, he actually knows how to play it.
That's cool. Yeah, what a resurgence, for a tune like that. Like I said, it reached millions of more people. I probably would have never even though they're still a gigantic, band, and but that definitely was a nice little push for them. I'm sure. I'm sure they're loving the royalties on that.
Absolutely. Yeah, not that they need any more money at this point. I think they're all worth like 200 million or 300 million or something ridiculous. But it's nice to get more paychecks. We'll take them. So I saw Metallica in Ottawa, I don't know, 15 years ago. So Godsmack was opening for Metallica. Then maybe 7 years ago, I saw them in Toronto at the Rogers Center. And I have tickets I mentioned in August for their 2 nights where they play 2 different sets. They got Pantera opening one night. They have Five Finger Death Punch opening the next night. What's your experience seeing Metallica over the years?
First time I saw Metallica was a big double tour. Might be a good little segue here too. It was 1992 or 3. It was Guns N' Roses and Metallica double headliner with Faith No More opening, and it was at the C&E grandstand. But it wasn't a grandstand; it was a whole C&E stadium, right? So, yeah, super cool, right? Which is a unique concert too, because if you remember this. James Hetfield a couple months before they were playing in Montreal, and they had a pyro mishap and burnt his arm and some of his face a little bit. And so the original concert was canceled. We were bummed because we heard about it on the day. They were supposed to be the day after Montreal. So we were a little bummed. A couple months later, they come back more near the end of the summer. And so they had a replacement guitar player. I forget his name, but he was in a band called Metal Church. They did a phenomenal job too. But it was interesting to see James Hetfield just with a microphone, you know what I mean? And I'm like, I feel like I'm missing something, but this is kind of history.
It's also something you're never going to see again. I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah. So it was, so Metallica was the only time they were ever 5-piece, I guess. And I think they actually were the onset where James was just singing for a bit, if I might be mistaken on that, but yeah, it was so, because even though we were bummed, I still in the back of my mind knew it was something, even though it was out of a really bad accident and really shitty thing, it was something kind of special, right? And different. So yeah, it was great seeing them, and then just to be followed up by Guns N' Roses. And if you remember at that time, like they were just Guns N' Roses was ruling the world at that point, right? It was just insanity. So yeah, and I've seen Metallica a couple times after that. I guess most recently was the Hardwired Self-Destruct tour, which was great. That was at I'm going to still call it Skydome. It's Rogers Center.
Old habits die hard. It's the Sky Dome forever.
I don't, just like even the Scotiabank still ACC to me, right? Um, but yeah, that was a great concert. That one blew me away because the production was pretty intense. And this is the thing, this is probably the first time you see Metallica where I've been, after years of touring and knowing production and rigging, and because I hadn't seen them for a long time because I didn't go to any of the concerts. I think I've only seen Metallica, I think 2 or 3. Yeah, I think it was only the third time I've seen Metallica. So seeing him on that Hardwire tour at the Rogers Center, it blew me away. It was more sonically, because they developed this subsystem, and I read about it a bit after, where they were using it for just the instrumentation and stuff, but when they were doing those concussive like bomb drops and those audio cues, where they had a sub-array system and they would fire them in succession, to add like a waveform, adding like a millisecond later to when that's next sub would fire that sound, then the next one, the next one, the next one. So by the time it got out to the audience, especially the people at the back, it was basically felt like a mild EMP. So I'm sitting there in my seat with my good buddy Chad, and they're doing it's the intro for the song One. So and then so all the all the narration and all the the helicopter and all the rifle sounds and stuff, and so we know what's coming. And there's big flash pot coming down to the stage, and it explodes, and they had it timed with this concussive sub drop, and it hit me. It was seriously like a right through me. I look at my buddy, I'm like, what the I'm like, I will be reading about what this PA is tomorrow, what they did to the subs to make this happen, me being an audio nerd. Yeah. So
man, they're using like acoustics and science and physics, and
it was basically a new I got to get refreshed on it to know the exact science of it, but it's just that it's time aligned subs, right? So they have a sound that is basically just all sub oriented. So it's within, they probably, it's within 20 hertz up to 50 hertz, right? And it's compressed, and it's just designated into that frequency, space, and just a whole array of subs fire, then the next ones and the next ones and the next ones until it builds, right? And then like I said, by the time it gets out to us, it's an actual wave, but at a very, very strong level hitting you, right? So it's not just when you go to concert and you feel that kick drum, it was something more than that. It was air actually moving you, and it was really impressive. I'll always remember that, and I want to get it. I need it. I got to work for it.
We need it.
I need it for lives, and just a big red button at front of house. Be like, okay, pow.
Yeah, you'll need the little glass case over top of the red button just to be safe. Yeah. With what is it? With much power comes much responsibility or something. I can see you at like a JJ Wild concert just with this button. Like,
it worked for JJ or not, but maybe, you never know. It might be a little spot for it.
So I have 3 more things about this album. This is really cool. In 2015, Master of Puppets became the first metal recording to be selected by the Library of Congress for preservation in the National Recording Registry for being culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. So the first ever metal album that they store for the future.
Yeah, it just goes back to what we were talking about. It was a huge cultural shift, that spawned as much as Black Sabbath was important to, the birth of heavy metal. So were they. It's just down the line a little bit in a little bit of a different direction, huge.
So a few accolades. So it was ranked number 97 on the list of Rolling Stone's 500 greatest albums of all time. Second on the list, second on Rolling Stone's list for 100 greatest metal albums of all time. I think number one is Black Sabbath because it's the start of that genre. And then Time included the album in its list of 100 best albums of all time. So it's an all-time great. Everybody knows it. Critics, fans. And anything else you have to say about this album before we move on to the next one?
It's just funny because with this reviews that you're talking about and just what what these albums have gone on to, it's like shooting fish in a barrel on my choices, right? It's like I'm picking all the easy ones, but it's just not like it's just what changed my trajectory on everything, and it just goes to show why. With what you're reading back, it's just huge albums, man.
Yeah, you've chosen like undeniably great albums. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. And I'm sure, I mean, we have a lot of listeners that maybe listen to country that are going to get into these for the first time, or we have a 14-year-old listening that doesn't know that these are the great albums that came before the great albums that are out now. So we're turning on a whole new generation here.
I'm basically in this thing covering, like, if you want to listen, like get a little schooling on 80s heavy metal right up to the 90s and that shift of what metal did. Basically, this is what this is. And
that is the school of metal here for everybody. So we have two more albums. So up next, this was the segue into Guns N' Roses, Appetite for Destruction, 1987. Man, I don't even, is this the greatest debut album of all time? What do you think, Dan?
It could be, if you're just even rock and roll, if you're just saying rock and roll, covering like a bit into metal and just back, from Stones to, to Pantera kind of thing, that genre, I would say yes, because it's just what that the chord that struck with everybody, right? Because it kind of, even though they were on that, like one of those bands just in that LA kind of scene, and at first it just kind of thought, oh, just another LA sleaze rock band. Like, it just, in those tunes and the aura of the band and the characters in that band too, it just mesmerized a generation, 100%. So, I would be hard pressed to not say that it was one of the greatest. It's just a phenomenal record. And it really changed my outlook on things too. And we'll get into it, but it really changed what was to happen later, as we were kind of approaching the 90s too. It was very quintessential in that, which we'll talk about later, after we talk about the record itself a bit.
Yeah, to me, this album always felt dangerous, like between the songs themselves and the artwork and the musicians in the band and the music videos, it felt like something like there was a danger to it. And maybe that is what draws us normal people into it.
Absolutely. And it goes back to what drew people into that danger, like say Motley Crue or a band like that. That band was just standing on the edge of a cliff the whole time. You know what I mean? Like, metaphorically, because it's just they're playing and their songwriting, the content, the lyrics, everything was pushing the absolute boundary of that genre. It was basically, when you think of it, it's like a Rolling Stones, which is one of the biggest rock bands that's ever existed, but with something else that the Rolling Stones couldn't even touch at that time, right? Or even at any point in their career. It was super dangerous, and I think there was a familiarity about it because it was like the tunes and with Slash's style and the way that they played, like very bluesy and rootsy too. So it brought something home as well. So it was new but familiar at the same time, right? So I think that's really kind of launched that into the popularity that it did have right out of the gate. It was just that vibe. You can't deny that stuff. Like I said, they're all comic book characters. Like even the cover of that record, the cross and the skulls and stuff, that could have been, a comic book, that if they went the Kiss route, they could have done that, right? Which they kind of, I guess, did with a bit of merchandise, not to the extent of someone like Kiss did, but they were all characters, with their definitely, there's guys that it's like Axl's my guy. It's like, yeah, I really like Duff. And it's like, oh, Slash is my guy. Right. No denying what that record meant at that time for sure.
So the album had 5 singles, but 3 of the singles in a row. So with Welcome to the Jungle, Sweet Child of Mine, and Paradise City, I mean, are those the 3 best singles in a row ever for a band on an album? I mean, if any band had one of those songs in their entire career, it's a game changer. They had those three in a row, which is just undeniable.
That's why they got to the height that they did, right? And that's why they were able to, quickly get in the studio and do a double album and tour the world on their second release. Only a couple years later after they hit the circuit, because it's just those three tunes. It's just, I remember it vividly, right? Seeing the Welcome to the Jungle video and stuff, and Sweet Child of Mine. That's obviously all the girls like Sweet Child of Mine. It's like all of a sudden, there's a gazillion, because all the dudes liked, Welcome to the Jungle and like Slash, and I was already playing guitar. I was just starting to play guitar at this time too. And it's Sweet Child of Mine. So girls get into it. So everybody likes Guns N' Roses. And then all of a sudden Paradise City, and it's like, then you get like parents and stuff liking it, because it was just a good old feel good song, right? Take me down Paradise City, it's just big old sing along fun, almost like a folk tune, right? But just aggressive and cool, right? So, but the whole record, this is like, there's no bad song on that record. There's no filler, absolutely none.
And it's like a longer album. Like I think there's like 14 songs. So it's like there's more room for songs that are weaker, but it's great all the way through.
If they would have taken away, I think, those three songs and still put out Night Train into maybe Rocket Queen, right? Into that, they still would have been a really popular band. Like, maybe not to that height, because you got to think like Sweet Child of Mine just put them like into outer space, right? But they still would have been a really big popular band with all the other songs that were on that record.
What's shocking is the album was not well received critically when it came out. It's like they dubbed them like a lesser version of Van Halen or whoever. Like critics just didn't get it. And it's funny, as I do these deep dives, I keep seeing these all-time great albums that upon release were panned. People didn't get it. It was ahead of its time. And now all of these albums, in retrospect, they're all on the list of greatest albums of all time. It feels like disrespectful, like, because I don't know what the reception was when it first came out. I was too young to know, but it's like all these years, I assume, it comes out and everyone loves it and critics love it. And I look back and I'm like angry at the people that, made those original reviews.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, like at that time, because we really weren't reading reviews, right? Because it's pretty young, like 13, 14 years old. And it's like, we're just watching, Much Music, listening to the radio, and reading like, Metal Edge and Hip Raider magazine, once a month coming out. And it's just like, they were just praising them, of course, right? In those publications. But yeah, it's funny, right? It must, like, those reviews were written, by some 30-something-year-old guy that had seen this whole 80s scene come about and probably were getting a little bit tired of the LA rock scene kind of thing. And, just wrote what they wrote. Because this is the thing, it's just like, there was a lot of bands that were like that sound, Guns N' Roses, Motley Crue, all that stuff. But it's just, that song content and the vibe of the band, and that bad boy thing was real popular. Like it was all with the kids. The kids did it all for them. It was all the 12, 13, 14 to 16, 17-year-old kids that were pushing that whole Guns N' Roses flag for sure. Because we all loved them to death. Like, we just like, these guys are the next big thing, and they were. As soon as we heard it.
So apparently the record label, so Geffen Records, they were having trouble getting Welcome to the Jungle, the music video, played on MTV. Like, it was too adult or too dark or whatever. So they were having so much trouble that David Geffen himself, like the legend, had to step in, and he went to MTV and he made a deal with them where, okay, just play it for 3 nights. That's it. That's all I need. 3 nights. And at 5 a.m. It's like the only time where they thought no one would be watching. And okay, David, we'll do it 3 nights at 5 a.m. And just from playing it for 3 nights at 5 a.m., there was such a demand of people calling in that they put it into rotation. And it became the single most requested song on MTV. And that was the start. So apparently the album was out for a year, because the first single was It's So Easy / Mr. Brownstone. And those weren't like world beater, massive global hits. So the album came out for a year and just kind of dragged on. And apparently the label was close to just saying, well, I guess that one wasn't a hit. And it was Welcome to the Jungle finally catching on at MTV. That so it took a year to gain traction. And after a year, it finally goes to number one. Eventually, it sells over 30 million copies. It's the seventh best-selling album of all time in the US. And it is still the single best-selling debut album for an artist in human history. And you think all of that, after 1 year, they could have given up on the album and it would never be what it became. To show, it's weird because the album is the album, and it's the artists have done what they're supposed to do: write and record and release great songs. And it just shows you how much luck is involved, that despite putting out one of the greatest albums of all time, nothing happens for a year. And without a little luck and a push from David Geffen, it's an album that gets buried. It's so that's why it's so shocking. Like when I interview these bands that have sold millions of albums, it's like everyone realizes how, despite the talent and the hard work and the great songs, how much luck is involved for things to just work perfectly with the fan base and the radio and a music video, and it just aligns sometimes.
Yeah, that's where we, talk about, it's the magic, right? And, it's because it's all those little things coming together at the proper time. It's it's a little bit of talent, a whole lot of luck, and maybe pushed by the right person in the right direction, right? And then things like that happen. It's crazy. I had to be out for a year, right? And yeah, it's insane.
You'd start to lose hope a bit after the year, being like, I guess it's just not happening.
I haven't read up on that a lot, of just like what the band themselves are thinking. This is going to make me really think of reading back to try and dig out to see what the guys were individually thinking, what they were going to do, and all that, right? Because after a year, right, you get a little worried, but that's the thing. It's just like, how could they not? It's easy for us to say, but you think, how could they not think that this album is going to do something at some point with all those songs, right? And honestly, at the end of the day, I don't think they care. They were just pushing. As long as they could keep on the road and keep playing, club dates and, be able to make a little bit of money, they would have just kept pushing anyway. So,
yeah, listening to the album, the Axl Rose's vocal range just between the first two songs. So you have Welcome to the Jungle that has some insanely high notes. And then the second song, It's So Easy, has like some of the lowest notes I've ever heard. So any comments on just the insane vocal range for Axl Rose on this album?
I remember that. I was thinking that's neat, right? Just like, wow, this guy can get right up there, and it's that high shrieky thing, but then the low part of it, right? It's just made him almost like going back to that comic book character kind of thing, right? It's almost just like this is a crazy cartoon character that's with all these voices. Like he could have been a voiceover guy, if he wasn't like ended up being a rock star. But it added to the whole mystique, crazy, neat thing, and why we had all dug them, when they came out.
So we were talking about the Metallica album, that there was a universe in which Geddy Lee produced it. In this case, so it was produced by Mike Klink, and Paul Stanley of Kiss almost produced this album. And then Mutt Lange was also considered. So Mutt Lange, it's like one of the biggest of all time. It's like, I'm sure he would have done something amazing as well. But thinking like Paul Stanley of Kiss might have produced that album, it just makes you wonder what it would have turned out to be.
I just honestly, this is one that I don't even know. It wouldn't have got done. I guarantee
just wouldn't have been finished.
It would have been
too much partying or what?
It could have been something like that, right? But I think it mostly that I think it would have probably bothered the Guns N' Roses guys so much, because I think it would have been tried to be more too polished, where going in with Mike Klink and stuff, and they're just like, just give me what you got. We're gonna make this sound as best as it can, right? And let the band be the band, right? Paul Stanley. Yeah, this is funny. There's cool little facts that you're spitting out at me that are really interesting to me. But if Paul Stanley would have got his hands on it, I don't know.
It's just because I know Paul Stanley as the musician with Kiss. I don't know him as a producer. Like that's what throws me off.
Exactly. Just it's a strange entity to imagining. Paul Stanley in the studio with all those guys, especially at that time, them all just, out of their minds, 19, 20, 21 years old, whatever they were, right? They would have
We're
been.
we're talking about all these guitar gods across your album. So you have your Zach Wilds and your Randy Rhodes and all those guys. And man, it's crazy the trajectory in just one album. Slash becomes a guitar god.
It was immediately, like, he was one of my favorites. Like, like as soon as I listened to that album through, and we actually saw a video. It was a bootleg video that we got, and it was not long after Welcome to the Jungle video came out that we saw. Got this bootleg video, and it was them live at the Ritz. And so we watched this video. It was really bad quality because it was a tape of a tape of a tape, a VHS tape. And I remember after watching that video, I was like, Slash was one of my new favorites. Because at the time, I didn't have a lot of favorite, overall guitar players, right? Like, I like Randy Rhodes was my guy. Zach was kind of new in with Ozzy, and it's like, obviously, like, Brian May and David Gilmour and stuff. And I thought they were cool. And, but Slash just came on the scene. I love that blues style. I have like kind of fast, aggressive blues, It was one of the first guys that I heard to kind of, in the mainstream of rock. It's a lot of, you got to think in the 80s, it was all really shreddy, arpeggio, neoclassical kind of thing going on. But it was like Slash just brought that, down home, bluesy, rootsy thing back into, to hard rock music, and loved him right away. It was like guitar god, and he just was right out of the gate.
So the album after this, so they put out Use Your Illusion 1 and 2, and November Rain is, a huge hit, one of their signature songs. That's like their equivalent of, Stairway to Heaven, or one of those epic songs. They actually had that song written for this album and decided they could only have either Sweet Child of Mine or November Rain that would be like the long kind of ballady song. And they chose Sweet Child of Mine. So it's just crazy to think they already have an all-time great album, and they had another all-time great song ready. And just for flow wise, they kept it for the one after that.
It's just funny how that all works out, eh? Because it was a perfect timing for something like November Rain, and thinking maybe would have been, in my brain, maybe too much for that first record. You know what I mean? Like, it's just the way that they recorded it too, right? So it would have been a very different song. It would have been very different at that time. So with that production budget and stuff, and spending that time and having all those strings and the piano and all those layers and the backup singers and all that, and Slash really honing things over touring and like coming up with this, because you think, and I remember back then, that age and stuff, like 1920s, when you're really honing in really the guitar player that you're going to be for your life. And, that's what he was doing at that point. So that's what probably led him to writing one of the best like rock ballad solos of all time. So it's really an interesting fact. I remember hearing that before, that it was already written, before. So I just didn't realize it was like, really a choice between, Sweet Child of Mine or that. So neat.
Yeah. The single Mr. Brownstone. So I just assume this is a character from something, like a book they've read or something. Did you know that brownstone is a term for heroin? I didn't know that till reading up. So it's their addiction, their struggles with addictions to heroin is Mr. Brownstone.
For that being, yeah, it's funny because I just listened to the song for the song now, but I remember knowing that was just about to, about the struggles and stuff with the drugs, because they all had it back then, right? So yeah, really unique songs, man. Just poignant lyrics, and it really summarizes the 80s craziness and the debauchery and the lifestyle and all that back then, right? And it just made it fun for us, because we were just kids, really even not knowing really what these guys were fully up to. We knew they were partying and all that, but it just made it look like, just up there, just having, the ultimate fun, right? They're just actually talking about their own struggles and stuff, right? Which is maybe fun for the time, and maybe a whole lot of not fun.
Yeah.
So
So speaking about writing about their troubles with drugs and alcohol and that stuff, I didn't know this either. So Night Train, apparently Night Train Express is a popular California wine, and that's what the song Night Train is written about. And it was popular because it had a low price and a high alcohol content. So again, that's a song. I'm thinking just an actual train that's going at night, and it's about Night Train Express wine.
too funny. It's like every area's got that, like the the old malt liquor and stuff. I think I remember drinking that stuff when it was 18 or 19 years old, and it's like, oh, it's awful. But I guess we're all trying to have a good time tonight. So yeah, those guys, ultimate partiers, right back then. They almost all, I think all of them almost died at one point, right?
Yeah, it's wild. All these bands you love are like the bad boys that barely survived their fame to still be here today. I have a couple cool points about Welcome to the Jungle and Sweet Child of Mine. The band said that Welcome to the Jungle was written in just 3 hours, so it was just a fast one that came to them. And Axl Rose says that the lyrics come from an encounter. He was in New York. He got off the train, and a homeless man wanted to scare them, and he yelled at them, "You know where you are? You're in the jungle, baby. You're going to die," which is like the famous lyrics from that song. It's a homeless guy trying to scare these young runaway looking dudes in New York. So
it goes back to like, how real and raw that album was there. It's a real raw, thing that happened in the life. And it's, that's the thing. I remember hearing that story shortly after that tune was out. Right. So they, do their interviews and be like, that's just cool. Right.
Should that homeless guy get some royalties as a songwriter here?
Yeah. Imagine that,
That'd be a cool story.
Yeah. Don't know if he's lied today. Go buy him a car or something like that. Right.
Or buy him a sandwich or something. Sweet Child of Mine is still to this day their only number one single on the Billboard Hot 100.
Right. But all of them charted quite well. Right. But that one was massive. It was just, you couldn't turn on any radio station. That's the thing, cross format. Right. And so you turn on the rock radio station or the pop radio station. It's just, that was it. It was everywhere. It was just walking down the street, people with their windows down in their cars, that tune would be playing. It's almost too much. Got sick of it. Like really, it was like almost the last song. I ended up skipping it when I'd be listening to the record, right? And just going and listen to, Rocket Queen or Brownstone or It's So Easy or something like that. Just listen to the kind of the B-sides, because you just hear those songs so much because everybody was playing them. Yeah.
So they went into the studio with a demo of Sweet Child of Mine, and it was a lot shorter. And the producer said, "I think we need a breakdown in there." So they record music for the breakdown. And this is another cool story. So apparently Axl Rose is in there, and there's this new breakdown that he's not familiar with. And the mic is on and it's his part. And he just says out loud, "Where do we go now? Where do we go now?" And the producer's like, "You should sing that." And that's where that "where do we go now," that part. Yeah.
It's a great Ireland breakdown. It's how perfect, right? Goes to show it's just like there's the magic again, right? You can just pull this stuff out of thin air and it just becomes this otherworldly thing, and it just came from nothing. It's just a mild suggestion. And it's a song that will live on in infamy, and a part that will live on in infamy, right? And it's quite insane.
That's the power of a good producer. So we don't know if Paul Stanley would have pulled that out of him. We'll never know. But I have a few more points, and then we got your last album we'll blast through here. So it's number 62 on Rolling Stone's list of 500 greatest albums of all time. VH1 named it the 42nd greatest album of all time. Number 2 on Guitar World's greatest guitar albums of all time. 2 quick reviews. Kerrang claimed that rock is at last being wrestled from the hands of the bland, the weak, the jaded, the tired, the worn, and being thrust back into the hands of the real raunch rebels. So that's a pretty cool review. And then All Music felt Rose's singing and songwriting were enhanced by Slash and Stradlin's dual guitar playing, which helped make Appetite for Destruction the best metal record of the late 80s.
Yeah, I think I got to agree with every single word that you just said. It was just it was a pounder. That album just once again changed everything, just kind of like I was saying before, it brought something back into rock that was kind of missing, but put it on a different trajectory, which I always say and firmly believe that kind of opened the door to the 90s, the bit of the grunge movement, right? Which is going to be another perfect little segue to get into the last one that we're going
Go
to talk.
ahead. If you want to launch us into the final album, go ahead.
Facelift by Alice in Chains was a record that changed a lot for me. This was a big toss up because Dirt, their second record, was just wonderfully written. Production of it, it just shined. It was such a great record. There's so many great songs on it. But for Facelift, for me, that came out of the blue. Heard I think the song "Man in the Box" on it was Much Music, Power 30 or Power Hour they were calling it at the time. At that time, it's been a lot of like thrash and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, Man in the Box came in. I'm like, what a cool tune, right? And what really grasped me about that tune was I obviously love the guitar playing. I was well into playing guitar at this point. I think I was 15 years old, so playing guitar for 4 years, and just a really unique style. I'm going to go back to that feeling, that right hand, and that's what Jerry Cantrell is to me. That's what he's really got more so than the flash of the left. He's just like his picking and that right hand. There's such a feeling and an aura around it, and supporting his writing style. But that record came out. I went and got the cassette, listened to it like crazy. And I remember I was in my high school band. We were playing more stuff, the Guns N' Roses, Motley Crue, Skid Row, writing our own tunes, which are in that kind of genre. And the singer of the band came over. We were just hanging out one day, and we were listening. I was just listening to that record. We were going to rehearse, and I was like, you got to take half an hour. We're going to be late. You got to sit and listen to this record, because I feel like this record's going to change the whole landscape of what is popular and what we're listening to now. And it really was a quintessential album for opening that door to all that stuff, because you got to think of that record came in a little bit before kind of like the
Nevermind from Nirvana.
Yeah, it was. And I think Louder Than Love, I think it was Soundgarden, but I had no idea. I didn't know who Pearl Jam was, Nirvana, Soundgarden, any of those bands. It was just all about that record. So that tune in particular, but the whole record, there's such a cool, unique writing style on that record. The guitar playing I love, and you can't deny the vocal styling of Wayne Staley and with Jerry Cantrell. And going back to what Steve Koba from Clarknova, the singer, he named them the Evil Beatles, basically back then, right? And that's exactly, I think that's a perfect way to describe Alice in Chains, because the way that Lane and Jerry worked together vocally, it's just singing more in fourths, where Beatles are like fifths and thirds, and somewhat more of the happier sound. They do those fourth and all that, and those minor intervals and those harmonies, and it was such a spooky, cool sound, but just big rock and roll fun band at the same time too. On that record, they got a little darker on Dirt, but it's like that Facelift kind of bridged that gap between the 80s fun stuff and that more darker, broody, haunty kind of sound that really came in the 80s, and within the Tool and Soundgarden and so forth. So definitely that album that changed my writing style and a trajectory of, made me want to actually sing. I didn't care about being a singer in a band, but until that band came around and started learning those songs and mimicking Jerry's parts, because he was a new guitar hero for me. I was 15 years old, right? And so that started me on that really pushed me into starting to write music. So up till that point, we'd write tunes and everything, but there was no substance or anything to them. We were just kind of mimicking, trying to be a little bit different from the bands that we were just listening to, like the Skid Row and Guns N' Roses and all that, trying to be enough different that we could call it original, but they weren't. They were just rip-off tunes. But up until that point, and then, putting all that stuff together, it's like, and I started writing, it's like, hey, I'm developing, like I said, with my guitar playing style being a little bit bluesy, but a bit progressive and a little bit shreddy. But the 80s rock thing with aggressive and a little bit of metal, but then this kind of eerie, interval thing. And I started developing a sound for writing, and then the bands that I did kind of after that were within that kind of realm. So that album really shaped what I was doing for sure.
Yeah, to me, the signature sound with Alice in Chains is the Jerry Cantrell guitar sound, which is very unique, and also the harmonies, the backup vocals, like you mentioned. So you have bands that influence Alice in Chains, but then you have bands that were influenced by Alice in Chains. So I always mention that, I was 16 when Stain Break the Cycle came out. That was a big one for me. And Alice in Chains is one of Stain's favorite bands, and you can hear on some Stain albums it sounds like Alice in Chains because they're doing that weird dark harmony that you don't hear very often.
Yeah, absolutely. They, like said, as much as important as Guns N' Roses were to a little shift in that, in that scene, that I feel Alice in Chains and bands like Soundgarden, of course, like and the like were as well. But for me personally, I think Alice in Chains is like just they just opened the door. They're one of my favorite bands of all time. Love Jerry Cantrell to death. And he's just cool dude that writes great songs, great player, amazing songwriter, yeah, super cool band. And that record changed a lot for sure.
So people think of grunge, they think of Nirvana's Nevermind. That's like the poster child of the grunge movement. And this actually, you mentioned, this actually predates it by a bit. And this album actually achieved some accomplishments before Nevermind did. So Facelift became the first album from the grunge movement to chart in the top 50. So it's the first like hit in the grunge movement. It's the first album in the grunge movement to go gold. So it went gold. And so that was September, and it was November when Nirvana's Nevermind either came out or went gold. So they were just Nirvana. It's like it opened the door to that sound. Like people started to embrace it, and they were ready by the time Nevermind came around.
Absolutely. It's funny. I've had this argument with people that just like, and you can tell, like, I don't even know why I continue the argument sometimes, but everybody thinks it's like Nirvana was that band that really opened that door, and they weren't, right? It's just maybe they got some more radio play, and so you get on listening to it a little bit later, but it was Alice in Chains that I felt like opened that door. Not that I felt, they just did. What an important band, those first two records. And I love all the records, the later stuff now, Black Lips Way to Blue, and and all that with William Duvall, on lead vocals and stuff. Amazing record still. But like
it actually sounds like surprisingly like Alice in Chains.
That's it. He's doing it's Jerry, because Jerry is so much of the Alice in Chains sound. Not taking anything away from Lane, because I love Lane to death. God bless his soul. It's just such a huge talent, in his tone and the emotion that he put into his vocal, second to none. And is hugely just as important to Alice in Chains as Jerry was. But it's just Jerry was such a voice, not just a writing, but actual real voice, that it's just like it lets the fans still hear the fundamental sound of that Alice in Chains in that in their albums now, and it's still great. Still love them to death. One of my favorite bands ever.
So the most known song is Man in the Box, which was the second single. So the first single is We Die Young. And just like we mentioned, Guns N' Roses, it took a year for Appetite for Destruction to take off. This album has the first single, We Die Young. And in the first 6 months, it only sold 40,000 copies. And then Man in the Box, as the second single, gets added to MTV rotation. And what took 6 months to sell 40,000 copies, within 6 weeks of that, sold 400,000 copies, to show how big the power of MTV and the music video and the right single, because Man in the Box is like an undeniable hit. It's also Nothing Sounds Like It. So it's like a signature song that kind of has its own stamp on radio.
Absolutely. 100%. That's like that chorus. It's funny how simple that chorus is, and with the dual vocal and the harmony, because it's E, G, D, and A. Like it's like campfire chords personified, right? Easiest tune, but that's the thing that just grabbed people. And it's that riff too, like that. So it's that clunky, like that jong, jong, jong. And the thing, it's technically Yeah, it's out of tune, right? Basically those notes really don't really work together very well, right? Because it's a high D over low E, right? And you hit those two together, and it's like it's not a very cool sound, right? You'd think, but just the way he played and a little bit of wah filter on it, and it just made this new cool grungy sound, right? There's no better way to describe it, right? So yeah, and that's the thing, just sent them off into the stratosphere, and yeah, well deserved, because they're just a wonderful rock band. Yeah, one of my favorites.
So I have a few things as we keep tying all 5 albums together. A few things here. Ozzy Osbourne listed Facelift as one of his 10 favorite metal albums. So I need Ozzy to go all the way through all 5 albums. So there you go.
It's top 10, eh? Oh, wow. It's good. Well, there you go. I actually never knew that in picking that, but no doubt. Yeah, when you listen to that record all the way through, it's so diverse. It's crazy how diverse it is. It's like there's tunes that are kind of that 80 poppy, high riffy thing,
there's like a Red Hot Chili Peppers sounding song near the end of the album. There's like a clean clink, clink, clink.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's like stuff that's just super dark, right? And then you get love, hate, love, right? Where it's just this, it's just all drawn out and it's like super emotional, and like it's really, really diverse record. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And you had mentioned earlier about something about Bon Jovi. So that guitar sound for Man in the Box was actually inspired by them hearing Bon Jovi living on a prayer. They heard that on the radio with that wah sound, and that inspired it. So again, tying back, things over your life that all work together here.
Oh, right. Yeah. So yeah, they didn't use the talk box that Richie Sambora would use, but it just used the back end of a wah-wah pedal and just filtered. It didn't go up to the top to get that real like Jimi Hendrixy like crang out of it. It was just a little bit of filter on that low, and it just gave it that tone, which is super unique, right? And it's still a staple to the you hear that, it's Jerry Cantrell right away.
I guess a few more things. We were talking about Nirvana's popularity and their popularity. So Man in the Box is the second most played mainstream rock song in the decade of 2010 to 2020. The second most played, obviously, after Smells Like Teen Spirit. So just to show the two of them, the two most played songs, period, for that decade.
Crazy, eh? Well, there you go. That's why, that's why they're being listed, I guess, right?
Yeah. Two more things. So the drummer, Sean Kinney, apparently he played with a broken wrist. So he had brought in someone else, because it's like there's they had created a buzz. I guess they had an EP before that was creating a buzz, and there was a deadline, and there's a lot of money involved. They were a top priority for the label, and they had to go in and record. And he had a broken hand, and he's in a cast. And they brought in a different drummer, and he was like showing them what to play. And then I guess he had this feeling that this was going to be a big album. And he's like, I can't miss out on this. And he takes off his cast, and he got a bucket of ice, and he did the whole album with a broken hand just to be a part of it.
Yeah, I remember hearing that. It's too funny, eh? It's just like, I remember it was like, it said the guy did a couple of takes, and it was just like, this ain't going to work. It wasn't just about that he didn't want like he wanted to be on the record. It's just like it just wasn't the right feel either, right? So I remember hearing about that. Thanks for reminding me. I have to dig that story back up too. But it's crazy is all these little stories that you've kind of reiterated. It's like these little tiny small decisions and how important they have become for all those records in the grand scheme of things in history, right? So it goes to show how every little moment counts, right?
Yeah, I guess the last thing I would say about this album is, it's sad, like the history of rock and roll and metal, like the drugs and the alcohol, and you have Randy Rhoads in the plane that passes away, and Lane is it Staley? I always think Stanley, Lane Staley. Him, it was heroin that did him in. And one thing that was just shocking to me is, so he was 6 feet, and when they found him, he was 86 pounds.
Yeah,
which is like it's just like a skeleton. Like it's so sad, like the talent of someone like they're in their 20s and sold millions of albums and a world-class talent, and drugs just, they get the claws in and don't let go, and it's just heartbreaking, you know.
And it's unfortunate. We've seen this story unfold time and time again, right? And it probably will still keep happening, unfortunately, right? But it's just unfortunate that some people. I think it's just in your DNA. I think it's and you get into that, and it's like some people can drink casually, and some people just can't, right? And if, some people just got to stop fully or just go fully, and it's really unfortunate. We've lost a lot of great musicians and just actors and just anybody, a lot of great people on this planet, just due to unfortunately getting into that world and not being able to get themselves out, right? And it's a shame that that it exists, but it's just it happens, and it's always unfortunate.
Yeah, we hope that we learn from our mistakes moving forward. It's the music industry it's an industry where it's easy to do drugs and it's easy to drink, and a lot of it is free and unlimited, and you're cooler if you party and do drugs, and the best thing you can do for your career sales wise is die, and your biography is better if you went through the struggles and the drugs and the addictions. And it's sad that it's we set these people up for that failure kind of thing.
Yeah, it is a sad reality, just because it's the thing. It's just the money's there, and it's just like that. It's all about the party, I don't think it's as bad as it used to be. Well, maybe just it seems like that on the surface, right? Because it's still got a lot of stars dying from drug overdoses and all that, but it does seem like that at least there's. It seems like to me that there's a vibe out there where you don't have to, get into that stuff to have a good time, right? Where it's like back in the day, it's just like you couldn't get away from it. Where now it's like it's kind of becoming the uncool thing to get into that, and it's a good thing to see, right? So hopefully there's a bit of a shift, but and who knows, man? It's out there. I don't think it's going to ever fully go away. Although no matter how much we wish it all would, but it's just unfortunate reality that we got to deal with that surrounds us, right?
So as we wrap up, do you have any honorable mentions? So I know you wanted Pantera, Far Beyond Driven. That is right there. That could have been in the top 5, but on a different day, So any shout outs to albums that our listeners should go check? They should write out all these albums, make a playlist, go check them out. What are you adding?
Well, that's definitely one. That's why I saved it I don't want to even put it as an honorable mention, but basically the Pantera, and I don't, since it's out of this 5, this class of 5, we'll just say basically, almost all the records, but especially the first 3, like Cowboys, Vulgar Display of Power, and Far Beyond Driven, just 2 monumental, mountains of records, right? Especially Vulgar and Far Beyond Driven. I would say the 2 greatest heavy metal records of all time, just for the sheer power and the precision of that. If you're thinking of heavy metal, it's just, the Dimebag Darrell and, Vinny and Phil Anselmo doing this thing. It's undeniable how powerful those records are. My big draw to it, of course, was I really get into it. Vulgar Display of Power came out when I was 17. So I was playing guitar for 5 years into metal. So it was just seeing Dime do his thing. It just totally changed my life in the way I play guitar. Right. And just the sheer power of it. You couldn't get any heavier at that point than Pantera, because it was that groove based, drop tune, groove bass. It wasn't just all about speed, right? Which a lot of those thrash bands are. You get the Megadeth and all that, but it was more about that, just that power and just that weight, right? So definitely those 2 records. It's Other than beyond that, go back to if we'll continue an '80s thing. I really like the Skid Row, those two Skid Row records, like the self-titled and then Slave to the Grind. They were just really, really fun, well-written records, and they really defined part of that era and that end of '80s era and that shift. Once again, those guys, they kind of dropped the frilly pink stuff, bands like Poison and all that stuff were doing, and kind of made it a little bit more real. It was more about leather jackets, cowboy boots and ripped jeans, right? So those two records, you can't deny going back to the '70s, it's just it's hard to say which one, but like any Black Sabbath records, right? And like the Led Zeppelin records, love Pink Floyd, that was kind of my, like The Wall was a big shift for me because it would just freak the shit out of me. As I had the LP and opened that up, and just like there's that big, it was basically, it looked like it's like the back of a woman's, because it was like a butt and the legs, and like the whole old school like judges,
Whatever the robe is, or
all that, right? And it's just the weirdest thing ever, so all that stuff, like the '80s stuff, you can't deny all the Led Zeppelin records of the '80s and all that, right? So, yeah, instead of doing honorable mentions about specific records, just it's just the stuff I grew up on. It's just you got to mention Kiss too, especially the first a couple of records. Especially when I go back and listen now, like Kiss has become Kiss in this overdrawn thing, but you go back and listen like Dress to Kill and stuff, and it's like, and they're just cool, groovy rock and roll tunes, right? They're having a blast, and you can hear that it's like they're really trying and coming up with some cool stuff, So yeah, I'm just ending off with that. That if I can mention anything, it's that big bulk of like '70s rock going into, even Thin Lizzy, and it's just all that stuff too, right? Even into Nazareth, and of course Stones and all that, right? It's just all good feeling rock and roll stuff.
So it's a good list of honorable mentions. So we have a tradition on the podcast where we have the last guest leave a question for the next guest without knowing who they are. So we have a question that is here for you. This is from season 4 Canadian Idol winner Eva Avila. So she has a gold album, multi-platinum single. She's actually in Brit Floyd, like the #1 Pink Floyd cover band. She's one of the singers in that group to tie it all together with Pink Floyd here. So her question for you is, what fulfills you most outside of the music industry?
It's pretty easy. Just my connection with family and friends, right? Because that's honestly, that's all I got. It's just like the music, I kind of compartmentalize that all together. Like I love playing guitar still, and writing, and obviously do live sound and travel, as a career, and I can compartmentalize that. That's a part of my life, but just as equally important, but just on a little shift over, is my family and friends, keeping, those connections solid and fun and alive and moving forward, right? It's always about moving forward, right? That's one of my biggest pet peeves, and it's the only time I've got myself down the dumps and had to dig myself out of the gutter a little bit, is when I'm not maintaining that. Because honestly, with the music thing, it's almost like a staple me, because it's so ingrained from when I was a kid, and it's just this fun and passion and everything, and it's just like, even though there's fun and passion and everything with family and friends, it's different, right? I don't feel like it's automatic. Those relationships, I feel like, take the work. Like, a lot of people, it's maybe opposite. Maybe they have to work at their their music career or whatever, and really try hard, right? It's like, even though I do, but I just feel like it's more natural, because it's like that fun element to it. It's like with family, and friends, and that, keeping those relationships alive, not alive, but just moving forward. Of course, they kept alive, but it takes a lot of work, and so keeping those two things on this forward, same level of trajectory, that's where I get fulfillment out of. Yeah.
And can you now provide a question for the next guest without knowing who it is?
Okay, yeah. I guess to say, so I guess we'll base it back to career, because these things are based on our careers mostly. It's like, what's the one thing that they would actually change that they would have thought would have changed the trajectory of their career to better themselves. Basically out of, there's probably multiple things. I got about 12 things or more that I'd say I'd change to mold where I wanted to go, even though I'm very happy at where I am in my life and in my career. But we always want to change things, as hindsight's 2020. So it would be, what is that one thing that you would change that you feel would have the most impact on the trajectory of your career?
Okay, have most impact. Perfect. Awesome. Now, as we wrap up, where can our listeners find you online if they want to stay in the loop with what you're up to? If they need a sound guy, if they need a guitarist, if they just want to say, "Hey, I love the interview," where do they go online to find you?
Into a band playing guitar again? That sounds interesting. You never know. One day. Never really think about that anymore, but that'd be interesting. But yeah, just so you can get me on Facebook and send to Dan Preston. Not hard to find. Just look for the beard. And Instagram, I'm under Danos Demanos, so DANOS_DA_MANOS.
There we go. That's where you find them. So, Dan, we've gone about 2.5 hours because we're so passionate about, we had a lot to talk about. You've been doing a lot of stuff over the last year since the first interview, and then we both love all the albums that you chose for your top 5. So we had a lot to talk about. So, Dan, thank you for coming back on the podcast. You were a favorite guest from the first interview, which is how you end up back here again by popular demand. So thank you for being here. Thank you for chatting with me. Thank you for sharing all your wisdom about those 5 albums so that our listeners can get excited and they can go out and listen to those albums and enjoy them as well. So thank you, Dan.
Cool. Thanks for having me on, man. It's always fun. This is a blast.
You're very welcome. So to the listeners, thanks for tuning in. To the Dan fans, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode. If you've enjoyed today's episode of the podcast, please take a moment to subscribe, like, comment, and share. What I want to know is, who would you like me to sit down with next for a 2-hour deep dive interview? You can let me know by reaching out to me on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Joel Martin Mastery. Joel is Joel. And you can find me on Twitter and Snapchat at Joel Mastery. So I am done. I am complete. I approve this message, and I'll see you on the next episode.